In 1878, a Chinese woman collapsed in the dust of a frontier town that saw her as less than human. 3 seconds from death, she was caught by the one man everyone feared, a silent giant who never spoke to anyone. What happened next defied every rule of that brutal world. She would face armed men alone. He would break his vow of silence, and together they would turn rejection into something no one saw coming. This is their story. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this tale travels. Let's begin. The sun didn't care who you were. It beat down on Oro Grande with the same merciless intensity whether you were a banker in a clean suit or a prospector caked in dried mud. August of 1878 had no mercy, and the town square, a stretch of packed earth surrounded by wooden buildings that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry, shimmered with heat waves that made everything beyond 20 feet look like it was underwater. Mei Lin Zhao felt every degree of that heat as she stumbled past the general store. Her legs weren't working right anymore. 3 days without proper food did that to a person. The dried fish she'd been rationing had run out yesterday morning, and the half canteen of water she'd nursed since dawn was now empty. Her mouth tasted like copper and dust. She knew people were watching. They always watched. A Chinese woman walking alone through a frontier town drew eyes the way blood drew flies. She'd learned that in Sacramento, then again in Placerville, and now here in this nowhere settlement clinging to the eastern slopes of the Sierra Nevada like a tick on a dog's back. The whispers started before she was halfway across the square. Look at that! Where she thinks she's going? Probably looking for the railroad camp. They're all... Mei Lin didn't catch the rest. Her vision was doing something strange, narrowing at the edges like she was looking through a tunnel. The buildings seemed to tilt. She put out a hand to steady herself, but there was nothing there, just air and heat and the smell of horse manure baking in the sun. Her father's watch pressed against her ribs through the inside pocket she'd sewn into her jacket. It was the last thing of value she had left. Everything else, the small trunk of clothes, the cooking pots, the jade bracelet her mother had worn, had been sold or traded away in the 6 weeks since her father died. Consumption, the doctor had said, as if naming it made it easier. It hadn't been easy. It had been slow and terrible, watching a strong man waste away in a boarding house room that smelled like mildew and other people's sickness. She'd held his hand at the end, felt it go slack, and then she'd been alone in a way she'd never been before. The world tilted harder. Mei Lin's knees buckled. She didn't remember deciding to fall. It just happened. One moment she was upright, the next she was going down hard, the packed earth rushing up to meet her face. Then she stopped. Not on the ground. In the air. Someone had caught her. The arms were massive, wrapped in worn flannel that smelled like pine smoke and leather. They held her upright with an ease that suggested she weighed nothing at all. Mei Lin's vision was still swimming, but she managed to focus on the face above her. It was a hard face, weathered by sun and wind, lined around the eyes and mouth in a way that suggested the man was somewhere past 40, but not yet old. His beard was thick and dark shot through with gray, and his eyes, pale gray themselves, almost silver in the bright sunlight, looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't say anything. Around them, the square had gone quiet. Mei Lin could feel the weight of all those eyes, all that judgment pressing down like a physical thing. "I'm fine," she managed. Her English came out rough, the words shaped awkwardly by a mouth that was too dry. "Let me go." The man's expression didn't change. He shifted his grip, supporting her more securely, and started walking. "No." Mei Lin tried to push away from him, but her arms had no strength. "I don't need... Put me down." He ignored her. They crossed the square, moving past the watchers who parted like water around a stone. Mei Lin saw their faces, some curious, some disapproving, one woman actively sneering, and felt shame burn through her chest hotter than the sun overhead. This was worse than falling. This was being carried like a child, like something broken, in front of everyone. The man pushed through the door of the general store with his shoulder, bringing them into sudden dimness and the smell of coffee and dry goods. The temperature drop was immediate and disorienting. "Colt." The voice came from behind the counter, a thin man with spectacles and sleeve garters. "What are you—" "She needs food." The big man's voice was rough from disuse, each word seeming to cost him something. "Now!" It was the first time Mei Lin had heard him speak. The storekeeper's eyes went from Colt to Mei Lin and back again. Something complicated crossed his face. I don't think... Now, Albert. There was no threat in the word. There didn't need to be. The storekeeper, Albert, swallowed and nodded, disappearing into the back room. Colt carried Mei Lin to a barrel near the counter and set her down on it with surprising gentleness. She wanted to protest, wanted to stand up and walk out with whatever dignity she could salvage, but her legs had turned to water. I have no money, she said. The words came out harder than she intended. I can't pay for... Didn't ask you to. Albert returned with a tin cup of water and a chunk of bread wrapped in cloth. Colt took them, handed the water to Mei Lin. She stared at it. Pride warred with survival. Pride had kept her upright through her father's death, through the long journey into these mountains, through 3 days of failed attempts to find work in a town that looked at her like she was something unclean. But pride couldn't keep you alive. Mei Lin's hands shook as she took the cup. The water was cool, probably from a well, and the first swallow hurt going down her parched throat. She forced herself to drink slowly, knowing that gulping would make her sick. Colt unwrapped the bread, tore off a piece, held it out. I don't need your charity. The words sounded weak even to her own ears. Not charity. He pushed the bread closer. Common sense. You're no good to anyone dead. I'm no good to anyone alive either, apparently. The bitterness slipped out before she could stop it. No one here will hire... Eat. It wasn't a request. Mei Lin took the bread. It was dense and slightly stale, but to her it might as well have been cake. She ate slowly, carefully, aware of Colt watching her with those pale eyes that seemed to see more than they should. The store had gone quiet behind them. Albert was pretending to organize something on the shelves, but his attention was clearly on them. Through the window, Mei Lin could see people passing by, slowing down to look in. Why are you doing this? She asked between bites. Colt didn't answer immediately. He pulled up another barrel, sat down with a weariness that suggested he'd been on his feet for a long time. You looked like you needed it, he said finally. That's not a reason. It's the only one I've got. They sat in silence while she finished the bread and drained the cup. Strength was returning slowly, creeping back into her limbs like water seeping into dry ground. With it came awareness of how she must look, of what people would say, of the fact that she'd just accepted help from a complete stranger in a town where she had no allies. Thank you, she said, setting down the empty cup. I'll repay you when I can. Don't worry about it. I always repay my debts. Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Colt's mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. Stubborn. Practical. Same thing sometimes. Mei Lin stood up carefully, testing her legs. They held, though not as steady as she would have liked. I should go. Where? The question caught her off guard. There's a boarding house. You got money for a room? She didn't answer. They both knew what the silence meant. Colt stood as well, his full height making the already small store feel smaller. He had to be at least 6.5 feet tall, built like the mountains themselves, solid and immovable. I need someone, he said. Mei Lin blinked. What? Up at my place. Winter's coming, need help getting ready, food preservation, repairs, organizing supplies. Works hard. Hours are long. He paused. Pays fair. Room and board included. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Behind the counter, Albert had stopped even pretending to work. Outside, 3 women had gathered by the window, clearly trying to hear what was being said. You're offering me a job, Mei Lin said slowly. At your home. Cabin. Up in the mountains about 8 miles north. Colt's face remained impassive. It's isolated. Nearest neighbor is 4 miles off. You'd be working alone with me most days. You understand how that sounds? I do. People will talk. They already are. He wasn't wrong. Through the window, the women were already in animated conversation, casting glances toward the store. Why me? Mei Lin asked. You don't know me. You don't know if I can do the work. You're still standing after 3 days without food. That tells me what I need to know. Colt reached into his pocket, pulled out a small leather pouch, and set it on the counter. The clink of coins was audible. Albert, Settle up whatever she owes at the boarding house. Get her a proper meal and supplies for the journey north. Colt, I don't think, Albert started. Wasn't asking your opinion. Albert's mouth snapped shut. Colt turned back to Mei Lin. Decision's yours. You can stay here, try your luck in town. Or you can come north, do the work, earn your keep. He headed for the door, paused with his hand on the frame. I leave at first light. If you're coming, be at the north stable before dawn. Then he was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving Mei Lin standing in the middle of the general store with Albert gaping at her, and the whole town probably already spinning stories about what they'd just witnessed. Miss, Albert said carefully, I don't mean to speak out of turn, but you're going to anyway. He had the grace to look embarrassed. Colt Mercer he's not a bad man, but he's not a man who does things without reason. And in all the years I've known him, 15, maybe more, I've never seen him take an interest in anyone. Lives up there alone, comes down twice a month for supplies, speaks maybe 20 words total, and leaves. That's it. That's all he does. And now he's offering to take a Chinese woman, no offense meant, up to his isolated cabin where no one would hear or see what happens. Albert's voice dropped lower. People are going to assume things, bad things, things that'll mark you even if they're not true. They already mark me, Mei Lin said quietly. I've been turned away from every business in this town. 5 restaurants said they had no positions even though I saw help wanted signs in their windows. 2 boarding houses claimed they were full even though I could see empty rooms from the street. A laundry, told me they didn't hire my kind. She met Albert's eyes. What worse mark could they give me than the one I already carry? Albert had no answer for that. But you're asking me to trust him, Mei Lin continued. A man I don't know, who doesn't speak, who lives alone in the mountains. You're right, it sounds like the beginning of something terrible. It could be. It could also be the only chance I have. She thought of her father's watch, still pressed against her ribs. Thought of what he would say if he were here. He'd been a practical man, not given to sentiment or foolish risks, but he'd also been the one who brought them to America in the first place, crossing an ocean on the promise of gold and opportunity. That had been a risk, too. Tell me about him, she said. The truth, Albert considered for a moment, then sighed. Colt came here about 16 years ago, maybe more. Nobody knows from where. He doesn't talk about before. Bought land up north, built a cabin, lives off what he hunts and traps, does good work when he brings furs to trade, honest in his dealings, never causes trouble. But he's alone by choice. Whatever drove him into these mountains, he's never left them, never tried to rejoin society. Men like that... Albert trailed off. Men like that are running from something, Mei Lin finished, or running to it. Either way, it makes them unpredictable. Mei Lin walked to the window, looked out at the street. The women were still there, now joined by a man in a banker's suit, all of them watching the store, waiting to see what she'd do. She'd spent 6 weeks being watched, being judged, being found wanting for nothing more than the shape of her eyes and the color of her skin. At least in the mountains, there'd be no one to watch. Prepare the supplies, she said. Miss, you heard what he said. A proper meal and provisions for the journey. She turned back to Albert. I'll need warm clothing, too. Whatever winter gear you have that fits. You're really going. I really don't have a choice. That wasn't entirely true. There were other towns, other places she could try. But each one cost time and money she didn't have, and each one came with the same guarantee of closed doors and hostile faces. At least Colt had opened a door. Albert shook his head slowly, but moved to gather supplies. Your meal first. Can't have you fainting on the trail. The meal was simple. Beans, salt pork, fresh bread. But after days of nothing, it tasted like a feast. Mei Lin ate in the back room while Albert assembled a pack. Dried goods, a heavy wool coat, gloves, a sturdy pair of boots that were only slightly too large. These were made for a man, he said apologetically, but they're good leather, better than what you've got. Mei Lin looked down at her own shoes, the fabric worn through at the toes. They'll do. The sun was setting by the time everything was ready. Albert had settled her small debt at the boarding house, less than $1, but it might as well have been a fortune, and sent a boy to collect her few belongings. North Stable, Albert reminded her. Before dawn. That means 4 o'clock, maybe earlier this time of year. I'll be there. And miss? He hesitated. If things go wrong up there, yeah. If you need help, I'll handle it. That's what I'm afraid of. Maylin spent her last night in Oro Grande in a boarding house room that smelled like old tobacco and loneliness. She lay on the narrow bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling while the town settled into sleep around her. Tomorrow she would go into the mountains with a strange man who barely spoke. She would live in isolation, work until her hands bled if necessary, and hope that this gamble paid off better than all the others she'd lost. Her father's watch ticked against her chest, steady and sure. I hope I'm making the right choice, Ba, she whispered into the darkness. The watch didn't answer. It never did. But somewhere in the night, an owl called out, and Maylin chose to take it as a sign. Dawn came cold and gray, the sun still hidden behind the mountains when Maylin shouldered her pack and made her way through the silent streets. The town was barely awake. A few lights in windows, smoke rising from chimneys, but already she felt eyes following her. The north stable was on the edge of town, a weathered structure that leaned slightly to the left. 2 horses were tied outside, both already saddled. Colt stood between them, checking straps and buckles with the methodical attention of a man who knew that carelessness in the mountains could kill you. He looked up as she approached. You came. You sound surprised. Most people choose the devil they know. Maybe I'm not most people. That almost smile flickered across his face again. No, you're not. He gestured to the smaller of the 2 horses, a sturdy roan mare with intelligent eyes. This is Rosie. She's steady, won't spook easy. You ride? Enough to stay on. That'll do. Colt showed her how to mount, adjusted her stirrups, and made sure her pack was secured properly. His hands were huge and scarred, but they worked with surprising precision. We'll follow the ridgeline north, he said, swinging onto his own horse with easy grace. Country gets rough about 5 miles out. Stay close, follow my lead, and we'll reach the cabin by mid-afternoon. What happens if I can't keep up? You will. It wasn't reassurance so much as statement of fact. They rode out as the sun finally broke over the peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed almost too beautiful for how uncertain Maylin felt. The town fell away behind them, and with it the last familiar thing in her world. Ahead lay only mountains, silence, and a gamble she couldn't afford to lose. Colt rode in front, his broad back a wall between her and whatever waited in the wilderness. He didn't speak, didn't turn around, just kept moving with the confidence of a man who knew every rock and tree. Maylin tightened her grip on the reins and followed. There was no going back now. The trail climbed steadily, winding through pine forests that smelled like sap and earth. The air grew thinner, colder, carrying sounds with a clarity that made every bird call and snapping branch seem impossibly close. Maylin had never been this far from civilization. Even the journey west with her father had followed established routes with towns and way stations dotting the map. This was different. This was stepping off the map entirely. After an hour, Colt finally spoke without turning around. You doing all right back there? Fine. Let me know if you need to stop. I'm fine. Another hour passed in silence. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file along a ridge that dropped away sharply on the left. Maylin tried not to look down at the valley below, tried to focus instead on Rosie's steady gait and the rhythm of the journey. They stopped near a creek to water the horses and stretch. Colt produced jerky from his saddlebag, offered Maylin a piece. Thank you. He grunted, which she was beginning to understand was his version of "you're welcome." Can I ask you something? She said. Can't stop you. Why do you live alone up here? Colt chewed his jerky slowly, looking out at the mountains. Lots of reasons? Name one. People are complicated. And you're not? Didn't say that. He turned to look at her. I'm plenty complicated. Just prefer to be complicated where it doesn't hurt anyone else. There was something in his voice. Not quite pain, not quite regret, but something close to both. You hurt someone, Maylin said. It wasn't a question. Long time ago. He stood, dusted off his hands. We should keep moving. Storm's coming in tonight. Want to beat it to the cabin. He was right about the storm. Maylin could see it building in the north, dark clouds rolling over the peaks like a slow avalanche. The temperature was already dropping. The last 2 hours were the hardest. The trail climbed steeply, then descended into a narrow valley that felt like the bottom of a bowl. Trees crowded close on both sides, their branches forming a canopy that turned afternoon into twilight. Then they rounded a bend, and there it was. Colt's cabin sat in a small clearing beside a stream, built from rough-hewn logs that had weathered to silver gray. It was larger than Mei Lin had expected, 2 stories, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that wrapped around the front. Behind it stood a barn and what looked like a smokehouse. "Home," Colt said simply. He dismounted and began unsaddling his horse with practiced efficiency. Mei Lin followed suit, her muscles protesting after hours in the saddle. "Barn's through there," Colt indicated with his head. "Rosie knows her stall. Get her settled, then come inside. I'll start a fire." The barn was neat and well organized, with space for 4 horses, though only 2 stalls were currently occupied. Mei Lin took care of Rosie, making sure she had water and feed, then stood in the dimness trying to process where she was. She'd done it. She'd left the town, left everything familiar, and followed a strange man into the wilderness. And now she was here. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Mei Lin squared her shoulders and walked toward the cabin. The interior was warmer than she expected, lit by a fire Colt had already coaxed to life in the massive stone fireplace. The main room was large and open, with a kitchen area on one side and a seating area with rough-hewn furniture on the other. Stairs led up to what must be a loft. Everything was orderly, almost military in its precision. "You'll take the loft," Colt said, banking the fire. "I sleep down here. Door bars from your side if that makes you feel safer." Mei Lin set down her pack. "You're giving me the better room. You're the one who'll be working hardest." "We haven't discussed terms yet." "Fair point." Colt pulled out a chair at the table, sat down heavily. 3 squares a day, room, as you see it, $2 a week in coin. Work starts at dawn, ends at dusk. Sundays off unless there's emergency. Agreement runs through first snowmelt. That'll be April, maybe early May. "What's the work?" "Everything? Food preservation, repairs, firewood, maintaining equipment, sewing, mending, keeping the cabin organized. Hunting and trapping are my responsibility, but you'll need to help process what I bring in." "That's a lot of work for $2 a week. Room and board's worth $8 a month anywhere else. You're getting better than $2 a week." He had a point. "And when spring comes," Mei Lin asked, "then we reassess. Maybe you stay on, maybe you take your wages and go somewhere else. Your choice." "What if I want to leave before then?" Colt's expression didn't change. "I'll take you back to town whenever you ask. No questions, no arguments. You're not a prisoner here." The words should have been reassuring. Somehow they just made her more aware of how far they were from anywhere, how completely she was at this man's mercy if he chose to break his word. But she'd made her gamble, time to see it through. "All right," she said. "I accept your terms." "Good." Colt stood. "Storm's going to hit hard. I'll show you around before we lose the light." He was thorough in his tour, showing her where everything was stored, how the water system worked, where the emergency supplies were kept. The cabin was equipped for long-term survival. Root cellar full of provisions, shelves lined with preserves, tools for every conceivable need. "You built all this yourself?" Mei Lin asked. "Most of it. Traded for what I couldn't make." "It's impressive." He shrugged. "It keeps the cold out." The storm hit just after dark, rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Colt made dinner, venison stew with root vegetables, and they ate in companionable silence. Afterward, Mei Lin climbed the stairs to the loft and found it neat as everything else in the cabin. A bed with a thick mattress, a small table with a lamp, a chest for storage. A window looked out toward the mountains, though now there was nothing to see but rain and darkness. She heard Colt moving around below, the scrape of a chair, the settling of logs in the fire. Then silence. Mei Lin lay down fully clothed, her father's watch under her pillow, and listened to the storm rage outside. She'd survived the first day. Now she just had to survive the winter. Sleep came eventually, deep and dreamless, the kind of exhaustion-driven sleep that didn't care about uncertainty or fear. When Mei Lin woke, gray dawn light was seeping through the window and something was cooking downstairs. She descended to find Colt at the stove, frying eggs in a cast-iron pan. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Good morning." "Coffee's on the table. Breakfast in 5 minutes." Mei Lin poured herself a cup, testing it carefully. Strong enough to strip paint, but after months of weak boarding house tea, it tasted like luxury. They ate quickly, eggs, bacon, bread, and then Colt was already moving toward the door. Today we start on the winter stores, he said. I need you to take inventory of what we have, make a list of what we need, and organize the root cellar. Can you handle that? Yes? Good. I'll be in the barn working on repairs. Call if you need anything. Then he was gone, leaving Mei Lin alone in the cabin with a job to do. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The root cellar smelled like earth and old potatoes. Mei Lin stood at the bottom of the wooden steps, lamp held high, surveying what would be her first real task. The space was larger than she'd expected, maybe 12 feet square, with shelves lining 3 walls and bins built into the floor for root vegetables. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested Colt's organizational skills stopped at the cabin's main floor. She set down the lamp and got to work. By midday, she'd pulled everything off the shelves, sorted it into categories, and discovered that Colt's method of storage was essentially put it somewhere and hope you remember where. Jars of preserves were mixed with dried beans, salted meat sat next to candles, and nobody had bothered to label anything with dates. This is a disaster, she muttered, wiping sweat from her forehead. That bad? Mei Lin jumped. Colt stood at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the daylight. You move quietly for a big man. Habit. He descended halfway, peering at her progress. What's the verdict? You have enough food to last a siege, but I have no idea how old any of it is. She held up a jar of what might have been peaches. This could be from last year or 5 years ago. Does it look bad? It looks like peaches in syrup. Then it's probably fine. Mei Lin set the jar down with more force than necessary. That's not how food preservation works. Things spoil. They make you sick. You need a system. Colt was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're right. That's why you're here. To fix your disaster of a cellar? To make things run better. I'm good at hunting, trapping, building, not so good at the details. He started back up the stairs. Do whatever you think needs doing. You've got full authority down here. Wait, but he was already gone. Mei Lin looked around at the chaos she'd created, at the piles of unsorted goods and the empty shelves waiting to be refilled properly. Full authority, he'd said, like it was nothing. Like he trusted her. That was either the smartest or the stupidest thing she'd heard in weeks. She got back to work. By evening, the cellar was transformed. Everything was sorted by category, labeled with strips of cloth Mei Lin had torn from an old sheet, and arranged so the oldest items were in front. She'd made a detailed list of what they had, what was questionable, and what they'd need before winter set in hard. When she climbed back up to the main cabin, Colt was at the table repairing a trap. He looked up as she emerged, covered in dust and cobwebs. Done? For now. She set the list in front of him. This is what we have. This is what we need. And this, she pointed to a third column, is what should probably be thrown out before it kills us. Colt scanned the list, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle with the paper. You did all this in one day? The alternative was letting you continue to store food like a raccoon. That surprised a laugh out of him, a short, rusty sound like he'd forgotten how. Fair enough. We need more salt, Mei Lin continued. More sugar, too, if you want preserves for winter. Flour, definitely. Your supply won't last past December. And those potatoes in the north bin are starting to sprout. We need to use them or lose them. Potatoes it is, then. Colt stood, moving to the kitchen. You cook? My father taught me. He teach you well? You'll find out. They worked side by side in the kitchen, Colt peeling potatoes while Mei Lin diced onions and prepared the rest of the meal. It was strange, this easy domesticity with a man she'd known less than 2 days. Strange, but not unpleasant. Your father, Colt said after a while. He the one who brought you west? Yes. He's still in California? Mei Lin's knife paused for just a second. He died 6 weeks ago. Consumption. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Colt wasn't offering empty sympathy. He meant it. Thank you, Mei Lin said quietly. He was a good man. Worked hard his whole life. Thought America would be different. Different how? Better, fairer. a place where the work you did mattered more than where you came from. She resumed chopping, the rhythm giving her something to focus on. He was wrong about that. Colt was silent for a moment. Maybe he wasn't all wrong, just wrong about the where. What do you mean? Cities are full of people. People bring their judgments, their fears, their need to feel better than someone else. He gestured vaguely at the mountains beyond the window. Out here, there's just the work. Mountain doesn't care what you look like. Winter doesn't judge your accent. You survive or you don't. And that's honest in a way people never are. Mei Lin considered this. Is that why you're here? To get away from judgment? Among other reasons. You gonna tell me what those other reasons are? Not today. She let it drop. Everyone had secrets. She had her own. Things she hadn't told anyone, wouldn't tell anyone, because some burdens were meant to be carried alone. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Mei Lin insisted on cleaning up. Colt didn't argue, just retreated to his corner by the fire with what looked like a journal. She watched him from the corner of her eye while she washed dishes, the way his large hands held the pencil with surprising delicacy, how he seemed to retreat into himself when he wrote. A man alone for too long, she thought, not because he couldn't survive with others, but because he'd chosen not to. The question was why. The days fell into a pattern. Colt rose before dawn, built up the fire, started coffee. Mei Lin would wake to the smell of it, descend to find breakfast already underway. They'd eat, discuss the day's work, then separate. Him to hunting or trapping or the endless maintenance that keeping a mountain homestead required, her to the 100 tasks that turned a house into a functional home. She attacked each job with the same methodical precision she'd applied to the cellar. The cabin's main room got reorganized, everything given a proper place. Clothes that had been mended badly got mended properly. The kitchen, which had functioned but barely, became efficient. Colt watched all of this without comment, but she could tell he noticed. A week in, she tackled the disaster that was his sewing supplies. Thread tangled beyond redemption, needles stuck randomly in fabric, buttons scattered like seeds. "How do you find anything in here?" she asked, holding up a knotted mass of thread. Colt looked up from sharpening a knife. "I don't, mostly. Just grab something that looks right. That explains why your shirt has 3 different colors of thread in the same seam. It holds together." "Barely." He went back to his sharpening, but she caught the hint of a smile. By the end of the second week, Mei Lin had established routines that made the cabin run smoother than it ever had. Breakfast at dawn, dinner at dusk, everything in between focused on preparation for the winter that loomed closer each day. The nights were getting colder. Frost appeared on the windows each morning, and slowly, carefully, she and Colt began to talk. It started small. Comments about the weather, observations about the work, practical questions about how things should be done. But gradually, in the spaces between tasks, actual conversation began to emerge. "You never told me where you learned to hunt," Mei Lin said one evening while preserving venison. "My father. And his father before him." Colt was across the room, working leather for new gloves. "Family trade, you could say." "Were you close, you and your father?" "Close enough. He was hard but fair. Taught me what I needed to know." "Is he still dead? 15 years now." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. He lived the life he wanted, died quick when his time came. Can't ask for much more than that." Mei Lin thought about her own father's slow decline, the way consumption had eaten him from the inside out. A quick death seemed like mercy by comparison. "What about your mother?" she asked. Colt's hands stilled on the leather. "Different story." The way he said it made clear the subject was closed. They worked in silence for a while. The only sounds the crackling fire and the scrape of Colt's knife against leather. Then he surprised her by asking, "What was he like? Your father?" "Stubborn, practical. He believed hard work could overcome anything." Mei Lin smiled at the memory. "He was wrong about that too, but it didn't stop him from trying." "He teach you to be stubborn?" "I came by that naturally." "I believe it." Another week passed. The work continued, endless and demanding. Mei Lin's hands, which had been soft from weeks of unemployment, developed calluses. Her back ached from hauling water and chopping vegetables and scrubbing floors. Her shoulders burned from hanging laundry in the cold mountain air. But she was eating 3 meals a day, sleeping in a warm bed, earning wages that would actually be paid. For the first time since her father died, she felt something like stable ground beneath her feet. Colt, for his part, seemed to relax around her. Not dramatically, he was still a man of few words, still preferred silence to conversation, but the wariness had faded. He no longer watched her like she might bolt at any moment. One afternoon in early October, he returned from checking trap lines with a problem. "Need your help with something," he said, dropping a bundle of furs on the table. "What kind of help?" "The kind where you tell me if I'm crazy." Mei Lin set down the bread dough she'd been kneading. "I'm listening." Colt unrolled a piece of paper, rough sketch of what looked like an addition to the cabin. "Winter's going to be hard. 2 people living on top of each other in close quarters for months. It's asking for trouble. I'm thinking we build out the east wall, add a proper room for you, give you space that's actually yours." She stared at the sketch. "That's a lot of work." "It is. An expense." "Some. I've got most of the materials already. Just need time. Time we should be spending on winter preparation. Which is why I'm asking if I'm crazy." Mei Lin looked at the rough drawing, then at Colt. "You're worried we'll drive each other mad cooped up together. I'm worried you won't have anywhere to go when you need to be alone. Everyone needs that." It was, she realized, probably the most considerate thing anyone had offered her in months. Not grand or romantic, just practical acknowledgement that she was a person who might need privacy. "We'd have to work fast," she said. "I know. And we'd still need to keep up with everything else." "I know that too." "Then yes, let's do it." They started the next morning. Colt had been right about having materials. Lumber he'd milled himself over the past 2 years, stored in the barn against future need. Together they hauled it out, measured twice, and began the careful work of expanding the cabin's footprint. Mei Lin had never built anything before, but Colt was patient, showing her how to hold tools properly, how to measure and cut, how to read the grain of the wood. Her hands, already tough from other work, developed new calluses. "You're a quick learner," Colt said one afternoon, watching her nail a board into place. "Had good teachers." "Your father?" "And necessity. Best teacher there is." They worked through the mild October days, racing against the calendar. The room took shape slowly, walls rising, a window frame installed, a door hung on sturdy hinges. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, and Mei Lin found herself taking pride in it. This was hers. She'd helped build it with her own hands. During a water break one afternoon, Colt asked, "What made you leave California? After your father passed, I mean. Why not stay?" Mei Lin wiped sweat from her face. "Nothing left for me there. The job he'd had died with him. The room we rented went to someone else, and every door I knocked on closed before I could even explain what I was looking for." "So you came to the mountains. Seemed like anywhere was better than there." "That's how I felt once," Colt said quietly. Turned out I was right. "What were you running from?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "A life that didn't fit anymore. Expectations I couldn't meet. People I kept disappointing just by being myself. Family? And a woman who wanted me to be someone I wasn't." He took a long drink from the canteen. "Thought I could change. Spent 5 years trying. Woke up one morning and realized I was drowning on dry land." "So you left." "So I left." Mei Lin understood that better than she wanted to admit. "Do you regret it?" "Only on the coldest nights." Colt stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "Come on. We've got 3 more hours of good light." The room was finished by mid-October, just as the first serious cold snap hit. Colt helped Mei Lin move her belongings from the loft, meager as they were, and set up her new space. A bed he'd built himself, a small stove for heat, a table and chair, shelves for her things. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it. Colt stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just walls." "It's more than that." He didn't respond, but something in his expression softened. That night, lying in her own room for the first time, Mei Lin felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safe. Not just physically safe, but secure in a deeper way. Like she'd found a place where she could exist without constantly defending her right to be there. It wouldn't last forever. She knew that. Spring would come, and with it decisions about what came next. But for now, she had this. A room of her own, work that mattered, and a strange, silent man who treated her like an equal. It was more than she'd dared hope for when she collapsed in that dusty town square. November arrived with the first real snow. Maylin woke to find the world transformed, everything buried under 6 inches of white that turned the familiar landscape alien. Colt was already up, stoking the fire against the cold. "Storm came in overnight," he said. "We're snowed in for at least a few days." "Is that normal? This early?" "No. Winter's coming hard this year." They spent the day inside, Colt maintaining equipment while Maylin worked through the endless mending that had piled up. The cabin felt smaller with both of them confined to it, but not uncomfortably so. The new room helped. When she needed space, she could retreat to it. By evening, cabin fever was setting in anyway. "Tell me something," Maylin said, breaking the silence. "Something I don't know about you." Colt looked up from the trap he was repairing. "Like what?" "Anything. We've lived together for 6 weeks and I barely know more than your name." "What do you want to know?" "What's your favorite food?" He blinked. "That's what you're curious about?" "It's a start." "Apple pie. My mother used to make it every Sunday. Haven't had a decent piece in 16 years. Maylin filed that information away. "See? Was that so hard?" "Your turn. What's yours?" Braised pork belly with preserved vegetables. My mother made it for special occasions." She paused. "Also haven't had it in years." "Maybe we're both just hungry for home." "Maybe." The conversation drifted after that, touching on lighter topics. Foods they missed, places they'd been, small moments that had stuck with them over the years. It was the longest sustained conversation they'd had, and by the time they went to bed, Maylin felt like she'd learned more about Colt in 3 hours than in the previous 6 weeks combined. The snow continued for 2 more days, piling up until it reached the bottom of the windows. They were truly isolated now, cut off from everything except each other. Strangely, Maylin didn't mind. When the storm finally cleared, Colt spent 2 days digging out paths to the barn and woodshed. Maylin helped where she could, though the snow was almost up to her waist in places. "You ever see anything like this?" she asked, struggling with a shovel. "Once, my second winter here. Lasted from November through March with barely a break." Colt heaved another load of snow aside. "Nearly went crazy from the isolation." "What kept you sane?" "Work. Always work." They finished clearing the paths by late afternoon. Maylin was exhausted, muscles screaming, but there was satisfaction in seeing the clean roots through the snow. That evening, she started baking. Colt noticed the activity but didn't comment, just watched from his chair as she mixed and rolled and worked the dough. It took 3 tries to get the crust right. She'd never made American pastry before, but eventually she had something that looked approximately like a pie. When it came out of the oven, golden and steaming, Colt stared. "Is that?" "Apple pie. Or my best attempt at it." Maylin set it on the table to cool. "The apples are from your cellar, so they're probably older than they should be, and I'm sure it's nothing like your mother's, but thank you." The words were quiet, but heavy with emotion. They ate the pie straight from the pan, still warm, neither speaking. It wasn't perfect, the crust was too thick in places, the filling too tart, but Colt ate 3 pieces and looked like he might cry. "It's good," he said finally. "It's passable." "No, it's good." He met her eyes across the table. "Thank you for this." "You built me a room. Least I could do was try to bake you a pie." "This is more than a pie." Maylin understood. It was acknowledgement, recognition, the kind of gesture that said, "I see you, I hear you, I care that you exist." They'd both been starving for that more than they'd been starving for food. December brought harder cold and more snow. Colt's predictions about a brutal winter were proving accurate. They fell into new rhythms, adapting to the isolation. Maylin continued organizing and improving the cabin's operations. Colt hunted when weather permitted, checked trap lines, kept them supplied with fresh meat. In the evenings, they'd talk. Not every night, and never forced. But the silence between them had changed from wary to comfortable. And when one of them felt like talking, the other listened. Colt told her about his childhood in the mountains of Pennsylvania, about learning to track and hunt before he could read, about the expectations that came with being the oldest son, and how he'd failed every one of them. Maylin told him about China, about leaving as a child and barely remembering it, about her mother, who died when she was 12, and her father's determination to build something better in America. Did he? Colt asked. Build something better? He tried. That counts for something. Does it? I think so. The trying matters, even when you fail. Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I used to think that too. Now I'm not sure. What changed? I learned that some failures are too big to come back from. Maylin wanted to ask what he meant, but the rawness in his voice stopped her. Everyone had wounds they couldn't talk about. She had her own. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and snow fell outside, two people learning to exist in the same space without requiring anything from each other. It was, Maylin thought, the most honest relationship she'd ever had. Christmas came and went unmarked except for a slightly better dinner than usual. Neither of them was religious, and celebrating alone felt hollow anyway. New Year passed the same way. January was the hardest month. The cold became vicious, dropping to temperatures that made going outside genuinely dangerous. They were confined to the cabin for days at a time, only venturing out for essential tasks. Cabin fever returned with a vengeance. Maylin found herself snapping over small things, Colt leaving his boots in the wrong place, the way he chewed too loudly, his habit of staring into the fire for hours without speaking. She knew she was being unreasonable, but couldn't seem to stop. Colt, for his part, grew more withdrawn. He'd go days barely speaking, just grunting responses to direct questions. They were driving each other crazy, exactly as he'd predicted. One evening in late January, it came to a head. Can you please put your tools away when you're done? Maylin asked, her voice sharper than intended. Colt looked up from the knife he was sharpening. I will, when I'm finished. You said that yesterday. And I meant it yesterday, too. They've been sitting there for 3 days. I'll get to them. When? When I'm ready. His voice had an edge now. What's your problem? My problem is that I spend all day keeping this place organized, and you undo it by leaving your mess everywhere. It's not a mess. It's my workspace. It's the middle of the floor. Colt stood abruptly, the knife still in his hand. This is my cabin. I've lived here alone for 15 years, and it's worked fine. Well, you don't live here alone anymore. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and accusatory. Maylin saw Colt's expression shudder completely. He set down the knife carefully, too carefully, and walked to the door. Where are you going? She asked. Out. It's 20 below zero. I'll manage. He pulled on his coat and left, closing the door behind him with deliberate gentleness that was somehow worse than if he'd slammed it. Maylin stood in the sudden silence, anger draining away to be replaced by guilt. He was right. It was his cabin. She was the intruder, the one who'd disrupted his carefully constructed solitude, and she'd just thrown it in his face. She waited an hour, then 2. The temperature outside was deadly. Even someone as experienced as Colt couldn't stay out in it indefinitely. When he finally returned, frost coating his beard and eyebrows, she had tea waiting. I'm sorry, she said before he could speak. That was unfair. Colt shook off his coat, moved to the fire. No, you were right. I've gotten used to living alone, forgotten how to share space with someone. But it is your space. I shouldn't have. You should. That's what I hired you for, to make things run better. He accepted the tea she offered. And you have. So this place works better with you here. I work better with you here, even when you're yelling at me about tools. I wasn't yelling. You were definitely yelling. I was firmly expressing an opinion. That got almost a smile. Is that what we're calling it? Maylin sat down across from him. We're both going crazy cooped up in here. I know. February is going to be worse. I know that too. They sat drinking tea, the tension slowly bleeding out of the room. We need rules, Maylin said finally, for living together, so we don't kill each other. What kind of rules? I don't know. Things like, you get the evenings to yourself twice a week. I get the cabin to myself for a morning. We both try harder to pick up after ourselves. Colt considered this. That's reasonable. And if we're getting angry, we say so before it explodes. Also reasonable. Good. Maylin stood, collecting the cups. I'll try to stop being so controlling about how you organize your work. And I'll try to remember that you live here too. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. February proved Mei Lin right about the difficulty. The cold was relentless. The cabin felt like it was shrinking, and there were days when the silence between them was more about not trusting themselves to speak than comfortable companionship. But they'd established those rules, and they helped. Colt started spending 2 evenings a week in the barn, working on projects out there. Mei Lin claimed Sunday mornings for herself, using the time to write letters she'd probably never send. And slowly, they found a new equilibrium. One evening in late February, Mei Lin was mending shirts by lamplight when Colt spoke from his chair by the fire. "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked up. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Fair enough." He seemed to gather his thoughts. "Why haven't you asked about going back to town? It's been 4 months. You could take your wages, try to find something else." "Do you want me to leave?" "No, but I assumed you'd want to." Mei Lin set down her mending. "Why would you assume that?" "Because this isn't a life. It's isolation and hard work and cold. You're a young woman. You should be, building something, finding someone, having a future that's more than this." "This is building something, and I'm not interested in finding someone." She met his eyes. "Are you trying to get rid of me?" "No, I'm trying to understand why you're staying. Because here, I'm not judged for being Chinese. I'm just judged for whether I can do the work. And I can." She picked up the mending again. "That's more than I've had anywhere else." Colt was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm glad you stayed." "So am I." March arrived with slightly warmer temperatures and the first hints that winter might eventually end. The snow began to melt in patches, revealing brown earth underneath. Colt started preparing for spring work, checking equipment, planning improvements, making lists of supplies they'd need when the trails cleared enough to reach town. "I'll need to go down in a few weeks," he said one morning. "Stock up on things we can't make or grow ourselves." "I'll come with you." He looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to see Albert. Make sure he didn't burn down his store without me there to organize it." "You really did a number on that cellar, didn't you?" "It needed doing." They both knew it was more than that. Mei Lin needed to prove to herself, and maybe to the town, that she'd survived. That she'd made it through a brutal winter and come out the other side. The trip to Oro Grande took most of a day, the trails still muddy from snowmelt. When they rode into town, people stared. Mei Lin held her head high. They stopped at the general store first. Albert's eyes went wide when he saw them together. "Mei Lin, Colt." "I didn't expect—" "Need supplies," Colt said, handing over his list. "And whatever she needs." "Of course." Albert scanned the list, then looked at Mei Lin. You made it through the winter." "I did." "Was it—" He caught himself. I'm glad you're all right." "Better than all right," Mei Lin said. "I've been working, earning, making something of myself." She saw him register the pride in her voice, saw the moment he understood that she wasn't the desperate woman who'd collapsed in the street 4 months ago. While Albert gathered supplies, 3 women entered the store, the same 3 who'd been gossiping outside the window that first day. They saw Mei Lin and Colt. Their conversation stopped. "Well," one of them said loudly, "look who decided to show her face." Mei Lin turned to face them. "Good afternoon." "I'm surprised you're still alive." "Sorry to disappoint." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Living alone with a man in the wilderness. Everyone knows what that means." Mei Lin felt Colt tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. "It means I have a job, a roof over my head, food to eat. What does your situation mean?" "I beg your pardon?" "You're here shopping in the middle of the day, gossiping about people you don't know. I'm here because I've been working. Seems like my situation is just fine." The woman sputtered, but Mei Lin had already turned away. Colt paid for the supplies in silence, his face unreadable. They loaded everything onto the horses and prepared to leave. "That was bold," he said once they were out of earshot. "I'm tired of being ashamed of surviving." "You shouldn't be ashamed. You never should have been." They rode out of town side by side, and Mei Lin realized something had shifted. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was living on her own terms, and anyone who didn't like it could mind their own business. The ride back to the cabin felt different, lighter somehow, like she'd shed a weight she'd been carrying without realizing it. That evening, after dinner, Colt poured them both coffee and settled into his chair. "I've been thinking," he said. About? Spring. What comes next? He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Your contract runs through first snowmelt. That's probably another month, maybe 6 weeks. I know. I'd like you to stay. Mei Lin's heart did something complicated in her chest. Stay? If you want. Same terms, or we can renegotiate. But this place runs better with you here. I run better with you here. He set down his cup. I know it's not much of a life to offer. Still isolated, still hard work, but it's honest work, and you'd be a partner in it, not just hired help. A partner. Equal say in how things run. Equal share in what we build. He met her eyes. If that's something you want. Mei Lin thought about the alternatives. Going back to town, looking for work that would never materialize. Trying another city, another town, always being the outsider who didn't belong. Or staying here, in the mountains, with a man who saw her as an equal, who respected her work, who'd built her a room because everyone needs space that's theirs. It wasn't a hard choice. I want that, she said. Something like relief crossed Colt's face. Good. That's good. They sat in comfortable silence while the fire burned down and the mountain night settled around them. Somewhere outside, an owl called, and Mei Lin thought about that first night in Oro Grande, when she'd heard an owl and taken it as a sign. Maybe it had been. Maybe this was exactly where she was supposed to be. Spring came slowly to the mountains, reluctant and uncertain, bringing mud before it brought warmth. By mid-April, the worst of the snow had melted, leaving the valley floor a mess of standing water and exposed earth. The creek swelled to twice its normal size, roaring past the cabin with a force that made conversation difficult near the banks. Mei Lin stood at the edge of the water one afternoon, watching it rush by with logs and debris caught in its current. 6 months ago, she'd been collapsing in a dusty town square. Now she was here, boots ankle-deep in mud, planning how to expand the garden plot for vegetables they'd need next winter. Thinking about drowning yourself? She turned to find Colt approaching with an armload of fence posts. Just watching the water. It'll calm down in a few weeks. Always runs high this time of year. He dropped the posts near where she stood. Help me with these? Want to get the garden fenced before the deer figure out we're planting. They worked together in easy silence, driving posts into the soft ground and stringing wire between them. The work was hard but satisfying, and Mei Lin found herself actually enjoying the physical labor. Her body had changed over the winter, stronger, more capable, shaped by months of constant work. You're getting good at this, Colt observed, watching her secure a wire with practiced efficiency. Had a decent teacher. Teacher didn't do much. You just pay attention. They finished the fence by late afternoon, both muddy and tired. Mei Lin surveyed their work with satisfaction. That should keep most things out. Most things, Colt agreed. Determined animals will always find a way. They were walking back toward the cabin when they heard it, the sound of horses approaching from the south trail. Colt's whole demeanor changed instantly. His hand went to the rifle slung across his back, and he positioned himself slightly in front of Mei Lin. We expecting anyone? She asked quietly. No. 3 riders emerged from the tree line. Even from a distance, Mei Lin recognized them, men from Oro Grande. She'd seen them around town during her brief time there, though she'd never spoken to any of them directly. Stay behind me, Colt said, his voice flat. I'm not hiding. I didn't say hide. I said stay behind me. The riders approached slowly, clearly sizing up the situation. They stopped about 20 feet away, still mounted. The one in front, a man with a tobacco-stained beard and a face that suggested he laughed at his own jokes, grinned down at them. Well, the rumors are true. Chinese girl actually made it through the winter. Mei Lin felt Colt's tension like a physical thing beside her, but she stepped forward. Can we help you with something? Friendly visit, the man said. Name's Jack. These are my associates, Tom and Pete. We were up checking some claims, thought we'd stop by, see how Colt's little arrangement was working out. It's working fine, thank you for your concern. Jack's grin widened. Awful polite, ain't she? Colt, where'd you find such a polite one? State your business or leave, Colt said. His voice carried no inflection, but something in it made the horses shift nervously. Touchy. We're just being neighborly. Jack leaned forward in his saddle. See, there's been talk in town. People wondering if the girl's being treated right, If maybe she needs rescuing. I don't need rescuing, Maylin said. That's what they all say at first. Jack's eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. But a woman alone with a man, way out here where nobody can hear, that's a situation that could go bad real quick. The only situation going bad is this conversation, Colt said. You've had your look. Now leave. We ain't done talking. Yes, you are. Tom, one of the other riders, spoke up. Maybe the girl wants to come back to town with us. Get away from this caveman you're shacked up with. Maylin's temper, already fraying, snapped. I'm not shacked up with anyone. I work here, I live here, and I'm not interested in going anywhere with men who ride 8 miles out of their way just to harass someone. Harass, Jack laughed. We're trying to help you, girl. You're too stupid to see it. I see 3 men who should have minded their own business. The atmosphere shifted. Jack's grin faded, replaced by something uglier. You got a mouth on you, and you've got about 10 seconds to turn around and leave. Colt's hand was on his rifle now, not pointing it, but the threat was clear. That a threat? It's a promise. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the rushing creek and the horses stamping nervously. Then Jack smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll be going, but we'll be back this way in a few weeks. Might stop by again, see how things are progressing. Don't bother, Maylin said. Wasn't asking your permission, girl. They turned their horses and rode back down the trail, disappearing into the trees. Colt didn't move until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. That was stupid, he said finally. Excuse me? Antagonizing them. That was stupid. Maylin felt anger flare in her chest. I was supposed to stand there and let them talk about me like I'm property. You were supposed to let me handle it. I don't need you to handle things for me. Clearly you do, because you just made enemies of 3 men who already didn't respect you. Colt's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. This isn't town, Maylin. Out here there's no law, no witnesses. Men like that, you give them an inch of provocation, they'll take a mile. So I should just be quiet? Accept being insulted? You should be smart about picking your battles. Like you were being smart? You were ready to shoot them. If they'd made a move, yes. But I wasn't running my mouth about it. They stood glaring at each other, the afternoon sun slanting through the trees and turning everything golden. Maylin wanted to keep arguing, wanted to make him understand that she was tired of being silent, tired of being careful, tired of making herself small to avoid men's anger. But part of her knew he was right. I should get cleaned up, she said finally. Dinner won't make itself. She walked toward the cabin, aware of Colt watching her go. Inside, she pumped water with more force than necessary, scrubbing mud from her hands and face while her mind replayed the encounter. Jack's eyes on her, the casual way he'd spoken about her like she wasn't even there. The assumption that she needed rescuing from Colt, as if any situation with him could be worse than what she'd faced in town. And the worst part was knowing they'd be back. Colt came in an hour later, having put away the tools and checked the barn. He moved around the kitchen, getting coffee, not speaking. Finally, Maylin broke the silence. I'm sorry, you were right. That was reckless. You were standing up for yourself, nothing wrong with that. But there's smarter ways to do it, maybe. Colt sat down at the table. But I understand why you did it. Those men looked at you like you were nothing, like you didn't have the right to speak in your own defense. That's how everyone's looked at me since I came to this territory. I know. They sat in silence while dinner cooked. When they finally ate, it was with the companionable quiet that had become their norm, but underneath it, Maylin could feel a new current of worry. 3 men knew where she lived. 3 men who didn't respect her, didn't respect Colt, and had made it clear they'd be back. That night, she lay in her room listening to the sounds of the cabin settling. She heard Colt moving around, checking windows, making sure doors were secure, heard the click of him loading his rifle, the scrape of him placing it near his bed instead of on the wall rack. He was worried too. 2 weeks passed without incident. The weather turned genuinely warm and they threw themselves into spring work, planting the garden, repairing winter damage to the barn, organizing supplies for the months ahead. Maylin tried not to think about Jack and his friends, tried not to jump every time she heard hoofbeats that turned out to be deer or elk moving through the forest. But the worry sat in her stomach like a stone. Colt noticed. Of course he noticed. They might not come back, he said one evening. You don't believe that. No, but it's possible. What do we do if they do? Colt was silent for a long moment. We make it clear they're not welcome. Firmly. Finally. And if that doesn't work, then we make them leave by whatever means necessary. The calm way he said it should have been frightening. Instead, Mei Lin found it oddly reassuring. Colt wasn't a violent man by nature. She'd seen enough of him over 6 months to know that. But he was a man who understood how to protect what was his. And somewhere along the way, she'd become part of that. The afternoon they returned, Mei Lin was alone. Colt had gone to check the northern trapline, a day's journey there and back. He'd asked if she wanted him to stay. Clearly not comfortable leaving her, but they needed to know if any traps had been damaged over the winter. "I'll be fine," she'd insisted. "It's one day." "Keep the rifle close." "I will." She'd meant it as reassurance, but now, watching 3 riders emerge from the southern trail just after noon, she was grateful he'd insisted. Mei Lin was in the garden when she spotted them. Her first instinct was to run for the cabin, but that would mean turning her back on them, and everything Colt had taught her about the mountains said, never turn your back on a threat. Instead, she stood up slowly, wiped dirt from her hands, and walked calmly toward the cabin. The rifle was just inside the door where Colt always kept it. "Well, look who's here," Jack's voice carried across the clearing. "All alone today, I see." Mei Lin reached the porch, stepped inside. Her hands were steady as she lifted the rifle. Colt had made sure she knew how to handle it, had taken her shooting twice to build confidence. She checked that it was loaded, then walked back out onto the porch. All 3 men had dismounted now, were standing near their horses looking up at the cabin. "That's far enough," Mei Lin said, raising the rifle. Jack laughed. "You even know how to use that thing?" "Well enough to hit what I'm aiming at." "Big talk from a little girl." "I'm not a little girl, and this isn't a conversation." Mei Lin kept the rifle steady, aimed at the ground halfway between them. "You need to leave." "Or what? You'll shoot us." Tom stepped forward. "We're just here to talk." "Then talk from there." "Where's your mountain man?" Jack asked. "He leave you all alone? That doesn't seem very protective of him." "I don't need protection. I need you to leave." "See, that's where you're wrong." Jack's tone had shifted, become harder. "Woman out here alone, anything could happen. Could fall, hurt herself, could have an accident. Nobody would know for days." The threat was clear. Mei Lin's finger moved to the trigger. "Last warning, get back on your horses and leave." "And if we don't?" "Then I start shooting." Pete, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Jack, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Pete." Jack took another step forward. "She's not going to shoot anyone. She's just a scared girl playing at being tough." Mei Lin fired. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 feet in front of Jack's boots. The horses spooked, rearing and pulling at their reins. All 3 men jumped back. "Next one goes higher," Mei Lin said. Her voice was calm despite the adrenaline screaming through her veins. "After that, I stop aiming at the ground." Jack's face had gone red. "You crazy. I'm the one with the rifle. That makes me the one who decides what happens next." Mei Lin worked the lever action, chambering another round. "And I'm deciding you leave. Now." For a long moment, Jack just stared at her. She could see him calculating. Was she serious? Would she really shoot? Mei Lin held his gaze and let him see the answer in her eyes. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Yes, it is. Because if you come back here again, I won't fire a warning shot." Tom and Pete were already mounting their horses, clearly done with this confrontation. Jack held out a moment longer, then climbed onto his own horse with deliberate slowness. "Colt know what kind of wildcat he's got living here?" he asked. "He knows exactly who I am." "Does he? Does he know you're willing to kill to stay?" "Do you want to find out?" Jack spat on the ground, then wheeled his horse around. The 3 of them rode off at a trot, disappearing back down the southern trail. Mei Lin stood on the porch until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then she carefully engaged the safety on the rifle, set it against the wall, and sat down hard on the steps. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline catching up with her. She'd just threatened 3 men with a rifle. She'd fired at them, and she'd meant every word she said. A year ago, she wouldn't have recognized the woman she'd become. The sun was setting when she heard a horse approaching from the north. She grabbed the rifle again, then relaxed when she recognized Rosie's distinctive gait. Colt appeared through the trees, took one look at Mei Lin sitting on the porch with the rifle across her lap, and urged his horse into a faster trot. "What happened?" he asked, dismounting before Rosie had fully stopped. "They came back." His jaw clenched. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did they—" "I handled it." Colt looked at her, then at the rifle, then back at her. "Tell me exactly what happened." Mei Lin recounted the confrontation, including the warning shot. Colt listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each sentence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You fired on them," he said finally. "I warned them first." "That won't matter to men like that. You just gave them justification for whatever they want to do next." "What was I supposed to do? Let them threaten me? Let them think I'm helpless?" "You were supposed to stay inside, lock the door, wait them out." "Hide, you mean?" "Survive, I mean." Colt's voice was rough with emotion. "You could have gotten yourself killed." "But I didn't. I stood my ground and they left." "This time. What about next time?" "Then I'll stand my ground again." Colt pulled off his hat, ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand what you've started." "I understand perfectly. Those men think they can intimidate me because I'm a woman and I'm Chinese and I'm out here without protection. I showed them they were wrong." "You showed them you're a threat. That's different." "Maybe it needed showing." They stood facing each other in the fading light, the gap between them feeling suddenly wider than it had in months. "I can't protect you if you won't let me," Colt said quietly. "I don't need protecting. I need you to trust that I can take care of myself." "It's not about trust. It's exactly about trust. Either you believe I'm capable of defending myself or you don't. Which is it?" Colt looked at her for a long moment, and Mei Lin saw something shift in his expression. "You really would have shot them." "Yes, to stay here. To protect what's mine." The words hung between them, carrying more weight than she'd intended. Colt's expression softened. "It's yours now? This place?" "Isn't it? You said I was a partner. Partners protect what they've built together." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the worry etched in the lines around his eyes. "I couldn't live with it if something happened to you because of me, because of this place." "Nothing happened to me. I'm fine." "This time." "Every time." Mei Lin stood, set the rifle aside. "Colt, I'm not some delicate thing that needs to be sheltered. I'm a woman who survived being orphaned in a foreign country, who made it through a winter in the mountains, who just faced down 3 armed men. When are you going to see me for who I actually am instead of who you're afraid I'll become if things go wrong?" He was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "I see you. I've seen you since you refused my help in that store because your pride mattered more than your hunger. I've seen you every day since." "Then trust what you see." Colt reached out, hesitated, then rested his hand on her shoulder. The touch was brief but grounding. "I'm sorry. You're right. You handled it. Probably better than I would have." "You wouldn't have needed to fire a warning shot." "No, I would have fired a killing shot. So yes, you handled it better." He picked up the rifle, checked it automatically. "But they will be back, Mei Lin. Men like that don't let things go." "I know. And next time might be worse." "I know that too." They went inside together, Colt securing the cabin while Mei Lin started dinner. The routine helped settle her nerves, gave her hands something to do besides shake. Later, after they'd eaten and cleaned up, Colt pulled out a chair at the table. "Sit," he said. Mei Lin sat. Colt pulled out his revolver, laid it on the table, then added the rifle beside it. "You know how to shoot, but there's a difference between hitting a target and stopping a threat. I'm going to teach you that difference. Now, tomorrow, and the day after. And every day until I'm confident you can handle yourself if they come back when I'm not here." "Colt, this isn't negotiable. You want to stand your ground? Fine. But you're going to know how to do it properly." Mei Lin looked at the weapons on the table, then at Colt's face. He wasn't trying to control her. He was trying to prepare her. "All right," she said. "Teach me." They spent the next week drilling. Colt was patient but demanding, making her practice until her shoulders ached and her ears rang from the gunfire. He taught her how to shoot from cover, how to reload quickly, how to assess threats and make split-second decisions about when to fire and when to hold. The goal isn't to kill, he explained one afternoon. It's to stop the threat. Sometimes that means killing. Sometimes it just means making the other person reconsider their choices, like I did with the warning shot. Exactly. But you need to be prepared for them not reconsidering, for them deciding to push through anyway. Could you do it? Mei Lin asked. Kill someone? Colt's face went carefully blank. I have. The admission hung in the air between them. In the war? She asked quietly. And after. Mei Lin waited, but he didn't elaborate. She didn't push. Everyone had things they couldn't talk about, and she was beginning to understand that Colt's time before the mountains included violence he'd rather forget. I don't want to kill anyone, she said finally. Good. That means you're not a killer. But if it comes down to your life or theirs, I need to know you'll choose yours. I will. Promise me. I promise. 2 more weeks passed. Spring was settling into early summer now, the valley lush and green, wildflowers blooming in patches of color across the meadows. They fell back into their routines, Mei Lin tending the garden, Colt working the trap lines and hunting. But now they both carried weapons whenever they left the immediate area of the cabin. It changed the feel of things, made the paradise they'd built feel more fragile, more temporary. One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Mei Lin finally voiced the question that had been building. What if they don't come back? What if that was enough? Colt was whittling, shaving thin curls of wood from a piece of pine. Then we got lucky. But you don't think we did. Men like Jack don't let things go, especially not public humiliation from a woman. He paused in his whittling. He'll be back. Question is when and what he's planning to do. We could leave, go somewhere else. Where? Another mountain valley where the same thing could happen? Another town where you'd face the same prejudice? Colt shook his head. Running doesn't solve anything, just moves the problem. Then what do? We wait. We prepare. And when they come, if they come, we handle it. Mei Lin watched the sun sink behind the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. She thought about the woman who'd collapsed in Oro Grande's town square, desperate and alone. That woman would have run, would have hidden, would have made herself small and hoped the danger passed her by. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to be safe was to be dangerous. I'm not running, she said. I know. This is my home too now. I know that too. Colt set down his whittling, looked at her directly. Can I tell you something? Always. When I first came here, I thought I wanted to be alone. Thought that was the answer. Get away from everyone, live on my own terms, never have to answer to anyone. He paused. I was wrong. I wasn't healing out here. I was just existing, going through the motions. What changed? You did. You showed up and turned everything sideways. Made me remember what it's like to care about someone else's well-being, to have conversations that matter, to build something with someone instead of just surviving by myself. Mei Lin felt her throat tighten. Colt, I'm not good with words. Never have been. But I need you to know. He stopped, seemed to gather himself. If something happened to you, I don't know what I'd do. And that scares the hell out of me because I haven't cared about anything in 16 years. She reached over, covered his hand with hers. Nothing's going to happen to me. You don't know that. Neither do you. We can't live in fear of what might happen. Then what do we live in? Mei Lin thought about it. Hope. We live in hope that we're strong enough to handle whatever comes. Together. Colt turned his hand over, interlaced his fingers with hers. It was the first time they'd held hands, the first deliberately intimate touch they'd shared. It felt right. Together, he repeated. I like the sound of that. They sat in the gathering darkness, hands joined, neither speaking. Around them the mountains settled into night, crickets singing, an owl calling, the creek running its endless course through the valley. Mei Lin had never felt more at home. 3 days later, Jack came back. This time he brought 7 men. Mei Lin spotted them first, early in the morning, while Colt was in the barn. She was hanging laundry, enjoying the warm sunshine, when movement at the southern trail caught her eye. 8 riders, all armed, Her stomach dropped. "Colt!" Her voice carried across the clearing, sharp with urgency. He emerged from the barn instantly, took one look at her face, then followed her gaze. His expression went hard. "Get inside, bar the door." "Not this time." "Mei Lin, you said we handle this together, so we handle it together." She could see him wanting to argue, but there wasn't time. The riders were already emerging into the clearing, spreading out in a loose semicircle. Colt grabbed his rifle from where it leaned against the barn wall. "Stay close to me. Don't fire unless I tell you to." "I know what I'm doing." "That's what worries me." They walked out to meet the riders, positioning themselves in front of the cabin with clear sight lines in all directions. Mei Lin had the rifle Colt had been training her with. Her hands were steady. Jack sat in the center of the line, grinning like he'd already won. "Brought some friends," Colt observed. "Figured we needed witnesses for what comes next." "And what's that?" "The girl shot at us. That's assault. We're here to make a citizen's arrest." "Citizen's arrest?" Colt's voice was flat. 8 armed men to arrest 1 woman. That seem reasonable to you?" "Seem necessary, given her violent tendencies." "She fired a warning shot after you threatened her on her own property." "Her property?" Jack laughed. "This is your land, Mercer. She's just your whore." The word hung in the air like poison. Mei Lin felt Colt tense beside her, felt the violence coiling in him like a spring wound too tight. "Take that back," he said quietly. "Why?" "Everyone knows what she is. What else would a Chinese woman be doing out here with a man?" Jack looked directly at Mei Lin. "You think you're special? You're just convenient. When he gets tired of you, you'll be begging to get back to town." "I'd rather die than go anywhere with you," Mei Lin said. "That can be arranged." Colt raised his rifle. "Last chance. Leave now, and we forget this happened." "We're not leaving without her." "Then you're not leaving." The tension ratcheted up another notch. 7 other rifles were trained on them now. Mei Lin did the math. 2 against 8 were terrible odds, but she'd be damned if she'd back down now. "You really want to die for a piece of Chinese tail?" one of the other men asked Colt. "I'm willing to die for what's right." "Are you willing to die for Jack's wounded pride?" That seemed to give some of them pause. Mei Lin saw doubt flicker across a few faces. Jack saw it too. "Anyone who backs out now is a coward." "Anyone who stays is a fool," Colt countered. "This woman hasn't broken any laws. She defended herself on her own property against men who were threatening her. That's her right. You try to take her, you're the ones breaking the law." "There's no law up here," Jack said. "Just what we make." "Then let's make this real clear." Colt's voice dropped to something cold and final. "You want her, you go through me. And I guarantee some of you die before I do. Probably you, Jack. You're the biggest target." Mei Lin watched Jack's confidence waver. He'd come expecting intimidation to work, expecting Colt to back down when faced with numbers. He'd miscalculated. "This is your last warning," Jack said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "Give us the girl or we take her." "No," Mei Lin said. Both men turned to look at her. "I'm tired of men deciding what happens to me. I'm tired of being treated like property to be traded or taken. I'm tired of all of it." She raised her rifle, aimed it directly at Jack. "I stay here because I choose to. I work here because I choose to. And I will defend my home because I choose to. You don't get a say in any of it." Her voice rang out across the clearing, clear and strong. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get back on your horses. You're going to ride away. And you're never coming back. Because if you do, I will shoot you. Not to scare you, not to warn you, to kill you." Jack's face had gone pale. "You're bluffing." "Try me." For a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Then Colt spoke, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "She means it, and so do I. You make a move, we both start shooting. You might get us eventually, but I promise you won't all make it home." One of the other riders cleared his throat. "Jack, maybe we should—" "Shut up. There's easier ways to make a point." "I said shut up." But the damage was done. The united front was cracking. 2 of the men were already edging their horses backward, clearly done with this confrontation. Jack saw his support dissolving. His face went through several emotions: anger, frustration, humiliation, before settling on cold fury. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Mei Lin replied. It's over, because I'm saying it's over. You don't get to come to my home and threaten me. You don't get to decide what I'm worth or where I belong. That's my choice. Mine. She lowered her rifle slightly, but kept it ready. Now leave. Jack stared at her for another moment, then spat on the ground. You'll regret this. I doubt it. He wheeled his horse around and rode off. After a moment's hesitation, the others followed, their retreat more ragged than their arrival. Colt and Mei Lin stood side by side, weapons ready, until the last rider disappeared into the trees and the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then Mei Lin's legs gave out. Colt caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as the adrenaline drained away and left her shaking. I've got you, he said. You're okay. You did good. I thought they were going to shoot us. So did I. Were you bluffing? About being willing to die? No. He helped her sit on the porch steps. I meant every word. Mei Lin looked up at him, this massive, quiet man who'd given her a chance when no one else would, who'd taught her to shoot, built her a room, treated her like an equal, who'd just stood beside her against impossible odds without hesitation. Why? She asked. Why would you die for me? Colt sat down beside her, set his rifle carefully aside. Because somewhere along the way this stopped being about a job, about convenience or practicality, or any of the reasons I told myself made sense. What did it become about? He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, his face was completely open. You. It became about you. Mei Lin felt her breath catch. Colt? I know it's complicated. I know I'm not what anyone would choose. I'm too old, too broken, too far from civilization. But these past months with you have been... He trailed off, searching for words. The best of my life. And I can't go back to how it was before. Can't go back to being alone. You don't have to. I need you to understand what you'd be choosing. This life, this isolation. It's not easy. It's not what most people want. I'm not most people. No, you're not. He reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with surprising gentleness. You're extraordinary. Braver than anyone I've ever known. And He stopped, the words seeming to lodge in his throat. Mei Lin covered his hand with hers. Say it. I love you. The words were simple, rough-edged, and completely sincere. Mei Lin felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. Colt pulled her close then, and she went willingly, fitting against his solid frame like she'd been made for that exact space. They sat on the porch in the morning sunshine, holding each other while the mountains witnessed their truth. This was home. Not the cabin, not the valley, but this. Two people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to build something worth defending. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. The days after the confrontation felt different, like the air itself had changed composition. Mei Lin caught herself looking toward the southern trail more often than she wanted to admit, half expecting to see riders emerging from the trees. But the trail stayed empty, and slowly the tight knot in her chest began to loosen. Colt noticed her vigilance. He didn't comment on it directly, but she'd find him positioning himself between her and the tree line when they worked outside, or pausing mid-task to scan the ridges. They were both waiting for the other shoe to drop. It took a week before either of them acknowledged it out loud. They're not coming back, Mei Lin said one evening. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Probably not, Colt agreed. You don't sound convinced. I'm convinced they won't come back the same way. Doesn't mean they won't try something else. Mei Lin turned to look at him. What do you mean? Men like Jack don't forget being humiliated, especially not in front of others, but they also know a direct assault won't work now. Colt's jaw tightened. My guess is they'll try to make life difficult in other ways, spread rumors in town maybe, make it hard for us to trade. Can they do that? They can try. The thought settled uneasily in Mei Lin's stomach. She'd been so focused on the immediate physical threat that she hadn't considered the longer-term social consequences. So what do? We live our lives. We don't let them dictate how we exist. Colt reached over, took her hand. And we do it together. The simple touch still sent warmth through her chest. They'd been more openly affectionate since that morning on the porch. Nothing dramatic, just small gestures that acknowledged what had shifted between them. A hand on the shoulder, fingers brushing while passing tools, the occasional embrace when one of them needed reassurance. It was enough, more than enough. Together, Mei Lin repeated. I like that. Good, because I'm thinking we make it official. She turned to him fully. Official how? Colt looked uncomfortable, like he was about to navigate terrain he didn't know. There's a circuit judge who comes through Oro Grande twice a year. Should be there in a few weeks. We could, if you wanted, we could make this legal. Mei Lin's heart did something complicated. You're asking me to marry you? Badly, apparently. Very badly. That a no? She squeezed his hand. It's a yes, but you should probably actually ask the question properly. Colt shifted to face her more directly. He looked nervous, this man who'd faced down 8 armed riders without flinching. Mei Lin Zhao, will you marry me? Why? The question clearly caught him off guard. Why? Tell me why you want to marry me, not because it's proper or because people expect it. Why do you want this? Colt was quiet for a moment, his rough thumb stroking over her knuckles. Because every morning I wake up, and the first thing I think about is whether you're warm enough in your room. Because when I'm out on the trap lines, I find myself hurrying back just to hear your voice. Because you make this place feel like home instead of just shelter. He paused. Because I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Mei Lin felt tears prick her eyes. That's better. So is that a yes? Yes, you stubborn man. That's a yes. He kissed her then, gentle and careful, like she was something precious. It was their first kiss, and it tasted like coffee and hope and the promise of something permanent. When they pulled apart, Colt was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. We'll need to go to town, he said. Talk to the judge, file the papers. People will talk. Let them. We'll be legal and they can choke on their gossip. Mei Lin laughed despite herself. You're not concerned about propriety? Haven't been concerned about propriety since I left civilization 16 years ago, not starting now. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing for the trip to town. Colt insisted on bringing furs to trade. They'd need supplies for the wedding, he said, and for expanding the cabin now that 2 people would be permanently living there as a family. What kind of expansion? Mei Lin asked. Well, Colt looked embarrassed. I was thinking maybe eventually we'd need more rooms for... He gestured vaguely. You know, future considerations. It took Mei Lin a moment to catch his meaning. Children. If that's something you want. She thought about it. A year ago, she'd been so focused on survival that the idea of a family had seemed impossible. Now, standing in their valley with the man she loved, it seemed not just possible, but inevitable. I want that, she said. Yeah? Yeah. The ride to Oro Grande took most of a day. They set out early, loaded with furs and a list of supplies they'd need. Mei Lin found herself nervous as the town came into view. The last time she'd been here, she'd stood up to those gossiping women, but that confidence had come from having successfully survived the winter. Now she was coming back to legally bind herself to Colt, to make permanent what the town already assumed was scandalous. You okay? Colt asked, noticing her tension. Just thinking about what people will say. Let them say it. We know the truth. They stopped at the general store first. Albert's eyes went wide when he saw them together. Colt, Mei Lin, this is unexpected. Need supplies, Colt said, handing over his list. And information. When's Judge Harrison due through? 3 days. Why... Albert's eyes darted between them, and understanding dawned. Oh, we're getting married, Mei Lin said, deciding direct was better than coy. Assuming the judge will perform the ceremony. Albert blinked several times. That's, well, congratulations? You don't sound sure, Colt observed. No, I am. It's just, people will talk, you know. Let them. I'm serious, Colt. There's been rumors, bad ones, about what happened with Jack and his men. Mei Lin felt her stomach drop. What kind of rumors? Albert looked uncomfortable. That you attacked them unprovoked, that Colt threatened to kill anyone who tried to help you get back to civilization, that you're being held against your will. That's ridiculous, Maylin said. None of that is true. I know that, but Jack's been telling anyone who'll listen that you're in danger up there. Some people believe him. Colt's expression had gone hard. Where is he? I'll straighten this out right now. He left town 2 days ago. Him and his friends said they were heading to Sacramento, but Albert shrugged. Honestly, I think they just got tired of people asking questions they couldn't answer convincingly. So the rumors are dying down? Maylin asked hopefully. Some, but there's still talk. You showing up here together, getting married, it'll stir things up again. Good, Maylin said. Both men looked at her in surprise. Let them talk. Let them see that I'm here by choice, that I'm marrying him by choice, that everything Jack said was a lie. The best way to kill rumors is to show them the truth. Albert considered this, then nodded slowly. You're braver than I gave you credit for. I've had to be. They spent the next few hours gathering supplies and spreading word that they'd be staying in town until the judge arrived. Maylin insisted on visiting every business that had turned her away the previous year, not to gloat, but to show them she'd survived despite their rejection. The reactions varied. Some people were genuinely happy for her. Others were coldly polite. A few were openly hostile. At the boarding house, the same landlady who'd claimed to be full looked Maylin up and down with undisguised distaste. So the rumors are true. You're marrying that mountain man. I am. Desperate or just foolish? Maylin met her gaze steadily. Neither. I'm choosing a man who treats me with respect and a life that's honest. That's more than most people get. The landlady sniffed. Well, I suppose you know your own mind. I do. They secured a room at a different boarding house, one where the owner was merely indifferent rather than hostile, and settled in to wait for the judge. That night, lying in a bed that felt too soft after months on a mountain cabin mattress, Maylin found herself unable to sleep. You awake? Colt's voice came from the other bed. They'd taken separate rooms for propriety's sake, but he'd knocked on her door after an hour, concerned. Can't sleep. Me neither. He was sitting in the chair by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. Town makes me nervous now. Too many people, too much noise. How did you ever live here? I didn't, really. Even when I was part of civilization, I was always on the edges, never comfortable in crowds. Maylin sat up. What made you leave originally? You said it was expectations in a woman, but... Colt was silent for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he started talking, his voice low and rough with old pain. Her name was Catherine. We grew up together, got engaged young. Everyone expected us to marry, have children, build a life in town. He paused. But I couldn't breathe there. Couldn't be who everyone wanted me to be. I tried so hard to fit into that life. But it was like wearing clothes that were 3 sizes too small. What happened? I told her I couldn't do it, couldn't marry her, couldn't stay. She said I was selfish, and she was right. I was. I left her there with everyone knowing she'd been rejected, left my family to deal with the shame. Came out here and told myself I was better off alone. But you weren't. No, I was just hiding. He turned to look at her. Until you showed up and reminded me that living and existing aren't the same thing. Maylin got up, crossed to where he sat, and took his hand. She was wrong, you know. You weren't selfish. You were just honest about what you needed. Doesn't change what I did to her. No, but it explains why you're so careful with me, why you keep asking if I'm sure about this life. I need you to be sure. I am. I chose this before I loved you. Now that I do love you, it's even easier. Colt pulled her down into his lap, holding her close. They sat like that for a long time, drawing comfort from each other's presence. 3 more days, he said finally. Then we're married. Then we go home. Home. The word settled into Maylin's chest like a promise. Judge Harrison arrived on schedule, a portly man with impressive sideburns and a perpetually skeptical expression. Colt and Maylin met him at the courthouse, really just the town hall with a fancy name. You want to get married, the judge said, looking them over with barely concealed doubt. Yes, sir, Colt replied. And you're both doing this willingly? No coercion? None, Maylin said firmly. The judge turned to her. Miss, I need to ask you some questions, alone. Colt tensed, but Mei Lin touched his arm. It's all right. He left reluctantly, and the judge closed the door behind him. Now then, Harrison said, settling into his chair, I've heard some concerning rumors about your situation. I need to verify that you're entering into this marriage of your own free will. I am. You understand that once you're married, your legal rights become limited? Your property becomes his, your earnings become his. I understand the law, and you're still willing? Mei Lin leaned forward. Judge Harrison, I'm 23 years old. I've crossed an ocean, lost both my parents, been rejected by every respectable establishment in this territory, and survived a winter in the mountains through sheer determination. I think I'm capable of deciding who I want to marry. The judge's skeptical expression softened slightly. Fair enough, but I have to ask, why him? Why a life of isolation? Because he's the first person who saw me as a human being instead of a problem to be solved or an outsider to be rejected. Because we've built something real together. Because when men came to threaten me, he stood beside me instead of trying to control me. She met the judge's eyes. I'm not marrying him because I have no other options. I'm marrying him because he's the best option I've ever had. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll perform the ceremony tomorrow morning. You'll need 2 witnesses. We'll find them. Finding witnesses proved easier than expected. Albert volunteered immediately, and the boarding house owner where they were staying, a widow named Mrs. Chen, who'd emigrated from China 20 years ago, offered as well. It's about time someone showed this town that we can build lives here, she said, even if they're not the lives people expect. The ceremony was simple, held in the courthouse with just the 4 witnesses present. Mei Lin wore her best dress, still worn but clean, and Colt had trimmed his beard and put on a shirt that wasn't flannel. Judge Harrison kept it brief and official. Do you, Colt Mercer, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Mei Lin Zhao, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of California, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Colt did, thoroughly enough that Albert coughed and the judge looked amused. When they pulled apart, Mei Lin was smiling so hard her face hurt. We did it, she whispered. Yeah, Colt said. We did. They signed the papers, paid the fee, and walked out of the courthouse as a legally married couple. A small crowd had gathered outside. News traveled fast in a small town, and the reactions ranged from supportive to scandalized. Mei Lin held her head high and kept her hand in Colt's. Let them see. Let them know this was real. They spent one more night in town, then loaded their supplies and headed home. The ride back felt different, lighter somehow, like they'd shed a weight neither had fully acknowledged carrying. How do you feel? Colt asked as they climbed into the higher elevations. Married, he laughed. That's it? Just married? It's a good feeling. They reached the cabin by late afternoon, and Mei Lin felt something in her chest ease when it came into view. This was theirs now, legally and morally. No one could question her right to be here. That night, they shared a bed for the first time, learning each other with gentle hands and patient discovery. It wasn't perfect. First times rarely were. But it was real and honest and filled with laughter when things got awkward. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Colt pressed a kiss to her temple. I love you, he said. I love you too. No regrets? None. You? Not a single one. Summer settled over the valley in full force. They fell into new rhythms as husband and wife, the partnership they'd built over the winter, now official and permanent. Colt expanded the cabin as planned, adding 2 more rooms that would eventually be for children, but for now gave them space for storage and a proper workshop. Mei Lin transformed the garden into something impressive, using techniques her father had taught her combined with knowledge she'd picked up from books Colt traded for in town. By August, they had more vegetables than they could eat, so she began preserving them for winter. You're going to run us out of jars, Colt observed one afternoon watching her work. Then you'll have to make more. Or we could accept that we have enough food. There's no such thing as enough food when you're preparing for winter. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. We survived last winter. Barely. This year will be better. This year everything is better. She leaned back against him, taking a moment to just enjoy the simple comfort of being held. When do you think they'll come? Colt didn't pretend not to know who she meant. Maybe never. Jack might have decided it's not worth the trouble. But you don't think so. I think men like that always come back. Question is when and how prepared we are. They'd continued drilling with weapons through the summer, and Mei Lin was now genuinely proficient with both rifle and pistol. Colt had taught her tracking, how to read signs of human passage through the wilderness, how to spot an ambush before walking into it. I wish we could just live without always looking over our shoulders, she said. We will, eventually. These things fade if you wait them out. How long did you have to wait? For what? For your past to stop chasing you. Colt was quiet for a moment, still waiting on some of it. Mei Lin turned in his arms. Want to talk about it? Not particularly. Colt, there are things I did, Mei Lin, things I'm not proud of, and talking about them won't change what happened, won't make them better. But carrying them alone makes them heavier. He pressed his forehead to hers. Maybe. But some weights are mine to carry. She wanted to push, but she understood the need for private pain. Everyone had secrets, wounds too deep to expose to light. If Colt needed to keep his, she could respect that. All right, she said, but if you ever want to share the load, I'm here. I know, that's more than I deserve. You deserve more than you think. Fall arrived with its usual show of color, the aspens turning gold and the valley floor becoming a carpet of fallen leaves. Colt brought in more game, and together they worked to preserve enough meat for the winter ahead. One October afternoon, Mei Lin was in the garden harvesting the last of the squash when she heard horses approaching. Her heart jumped immediately, and she grabbed the rifle she now kept close whenever working outside. But these weren't the riders she'd feared. Two men emerged from the trail, both older, both wearing badges that caught the afternoon sun. Lawmen. Colt, she called, not taking her eyes off the approaching riders. He appeared from the barn, took in the situation, and moved to stand beside her. His hand rested on his pistol, but he didn't draw. The men reined in their horses about 15 feet away. Afternoon, the first one said. He was grizzled, probably in his 50s, with eyes that had seen too much. I'm Marshal Webb. This is Deputy Morrison. We're looking for Colt Mercer. You found him, Colt said. And Mei Lin Zhao. Or is it Mercer now? Mercer, Mei Lin confirmed. What's this about? We had some complaints, serious ones, about a woman being held against her will, threats of violence, assault on citizens. Webb's gaze was steady. Normally, we don't ride all the way out here for rumors, but these came with enough detail that we had to investigate. Let me guess, Colt said. Jack filed the complaint. Among others. You know him? He was here with 7 other men, trying to take my wife by force. We defended ourselves. Webb's eyebrows rose. That's not how the complaint reads. I'm sure it's not. The marshal turned to Mei Lin. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. Are you here willingly? Yes. Are you being coerced or threatened in any way? No. The complaint says you were kidnapped from town, brought here against your will, and prevented from leaving. Mei Lin felt anger flash through her. The complaint is a lie. I came here of my own choice last August. I've stayed of my own choice. And I married Colt of my own choice 3 months ago. Judge Harrison performed the ceremony. We verified the marriage, Morrison said, speaking for the first time. It's legal. Then what are you doing here? Colt asked. Making sure, Webb said. We had to check, you understand. I understand Jack is spreading lies because we humiliated him. He says you threatened to kill him. I did, after he brought 8 armed men to my property to take my wife by force. That's called defending my home. Webb studied them both for a long moment. You got witnesses to any of this? Just each other, Mei Lin said. But I'm telling the truth. Jack came here twice, both times with threats. The second time he brought enough men to start a war. We defended ourselves, and he's been spreading rumors ever since. The people in town say whatever suits their prejudices, Mei Lin interrupted. I'm Chinese, Colt's a recluse. We're easy targets for gossip, but that doesn't make it true. Morrison looked at Webb. She's got a point, and the marriage is legal. Harrison wouldn't have performed it if he thought there was coercion. Webb nodded slowly. All right, we've done our duty, investigated the complaint. Far as I can see, this is a legal marriage between 2 consenting adults. He looked at Mei Lin. Ma'am, If that changes, if you need help, you send word and we'll come. I won't need help, but thank you. The lawmen turned their horses to leave, but Webb paused. One more thing. Jack and his friends left California. Word is they're in Nevada now, still running their mouths about what happened here. You probably won't see them again, but if you do, you send for us. Let the law handle it. We'll handle our own problems, Colt said. That's what I'm afraid of. Webb tipped his hat. Good day to you both. They rode off, disappearing back down the trail. Maylin let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That could have gone worse. Could have gone better, too. At least they believed us. This time. But Jack's still out there, still spreading poison. Colt's jaw was tight. He won't let this go. Then we'll deal with it if it comes back. Maylin lowered the rifle. But I'm tired of living in fear of what might happen. We've done everything right. Married legally, built a life honestly. At some point, we have to just live it. Colt looked at her, and some of the tension left his shoulders. You're right. I usually am. That got a smile. Don't let it go to your head. They went back to work, the interruption fading into just another challenge faced and overcome. Winter came early that year, the first snow falling in November, and not letting up. But they were prepared. More prepared than they'd been the year before. The cabin was stocked with enough food to last 6 months. The barn was reinforced against the cold, and they'd even built a covered walkway between the two structures so they wouldn't have to wade through deep snow for daily tasks. On Christmas Eve, Maylin gave Colt a gift she'd been working on for months, a new shirt she'd made from fabric traded for in town, sewn with careful stitches and embroidered with a simple pattern along the collar. It's beautiful, he said, running his fingers over the stitching. You needed something nice. I need a lot of things. Nice shirts aren't high on the list. They are on mine. He kissed her, soft and sweet. Thank you. You're welcome, your turn. Colt handed her a small wooden box he'd carved himself. Inside was a ring, simple gold, clearly old, with a pattern of leaves etched around the band. It was my grandmother's, he said. Only thing I kept from before. Been carrying it for 16 years, never knowing what to do with it. He took the ring, slipped it onto her finger. Now I know. Maylin looked at the ring, then at her husband, and felt tears slip down her cheeks. It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm really not. Perfect for me, then. They spent Christmas curled up by the fire, content in their small cabin while snow fell outside. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined, but it was real and it was theirs. January brought brutal cold, and Maylin realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but when she missed her second monthly cycle, she knew for certain. The knowledge sat inside her chest like a secret sun, warming her from the inside out. She waited until after dinner to tell Colt. I have something to tell you, she said. He looked up from the saddle he was repairing. Good something or bad something? Good, I think. You think? Maylin took a breath. I'm pregnant. The saddle slipped from Colt's hands, hitting the floor with a thud. He stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, wonder, and fear in rapid succession. You're sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor. He crossed to her, took her hands. How do you feel? Terrified, excited, a little sick in the mornings. We should go to town, see a doctor, make sure everything's... Colt, we're snowed in until March at least. Then I'll dig us out. She laughed despite her own nerves. It's fine. Women have babies without doctors all the time. Not my wife. Not my child. Our child. The word seemed to hit him like a physical blow. Our child. He pressed his hand to her still flat stomach. There's a person in there. A very small person. When? Late summer, I think. August, maybe early September. Colt pulled her close, holding her like she might disappear. I'm going to be a father. You're going to be a great father. You don't know that. Oh, I do actually. I've watched you with the animals, seen how patient you are teaching me things. You'll be patient with our child too. What if I'm not good enough? Then we'll figure it out together. Maylin pulled back to look at him. We've handled everything else that's come our way. We'll handle this too. The fear in Colt's eyes slowly gave way to something else. Hope, maybe. Or determination. A baby, he said wonderingly. A baby. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, like she was made of glass. The rest of winter passed in a haze of preparation and planning. Colt threw himself into building a cradle, carving it from pine and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Maylin sewed tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, her hands creating something for a child she hadn't yet met. They argued about names. Colt wanted something traditional. Maylin wanted something that honored both their backgrounds. "What about your mother's name?" Colt suggested one evening. Li Hua. It means beautiful flower. That's pretty. For a girl. What about for a boy? My father was called John, plain but solid. Too plain. What was your grandfather's name? Thomas. Maylin considered. Thomas Mercer, it has a good sound. And if it's a girl, Li Hua Mercer? Maybe. Or we could do both. Li Hua for a middle name, something American for first. Like what? I don't know. Sarah? Emma? Rose. Like the horse. Maylin laughed. You want to name our daughter after your horse? It's a good name, and Rosie's been loyal. Rose Li Hua Mercer. Maylin tested it out. Actually, that's not bad. And Thomas for a boy? Thomas John Mercer, after both grandfathers. Deal. Spring came with mudslides and rushing water, the snow melting so fast it turned the valley into a temporary lake. They spent weeks just managing the flooding, building channels to direct water away from the cabin and barn. By May, Maylin's pregnancy was obvious. Her belly had rounded out, and she felt the baby moving inside her, small flutters at first, then stronger kicks. It's active, she said one evening, guiding Colt's hand to where the baby was kicking. His face lit up with wonder. I can feel it. That's your child saying hello. Hello, little one, Colt said to her belly. We're excited to meet you. The baby kicked again, and they both laughed. Everything felt possible. But in June, reality came crashing back. Maylin was hanging laundry when she saw them, riders approaching from the south. Not 8 this time, 20, maybe more. And she recognized the man in front. Jack had come home. Maylin's hand stilled on the wet cloth she'd been hanging. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, could only watch the line of riders emerge from the trees like something out of a nightmare she'd thought was over. 20 men, maybe more, all armed, and Jack leading them with that same ugly grin she remembered from nearly a year ago. Colt! Her voice came out steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. He was out of the barn in seconds, rifle already in hand. He took one look at the approaching riders, and his face went hard as granite. Get inside! Bar the door! No. Maylin, you're pregnant. You can't. I can and I will. She moved to stand beside him, her own rifle gripped tight. We face this together. There's too many of them. I know. Colt looked at her, at the determined set of her jaw and the fire in her eyes, and something in his expression shifted. Not resignation, but acceptance. If this was how it ended, at least they'd go down fighting side by side. The riders spread out in a semicircle, blocking every escape route. Jack dismounted slowly, making a show of his confidence. Most of the men with him looked uncomfortable. Hired guns, Maylin realized, not locals with a personal grudge. Well, well, Jack said, his voice carrying across the clearing. Heard you two made it official. Congratulations on the wedding. His eyes dropped to Maylin's rounded belly. And the baby. Didn't waste any time, did you? State your business and leave, Colt said flatly. My business. My business is unfinished, Jack gestured to his men. See, I went to Nevada like a smart man would. Told everyone what happened here, how a Chinese whore and her mountain dog humiliated honest citizens. And you know what I found? A lot of people who agreed that someone needed to teach you both a lesson. These aren't Nevada men, Maylin observed. They're hired. How much did you pay them? A few of the riders shifted uncomfortably. Jack's grin faltered. Doesn't matter who they are. What matters is there's 20 of us and 2 of you. 2 of us who know this land, Colt said. 2 of us who've got nothing to lose. How many of your hired guns are willing to die for your wounded pride? Enough. But Jack's voice had lost some of its certainty. Maylin took a step forward, letting her hand rest on her belly in a deliberate gesture. Look at me. I'm pregnant. I'm standing here defending my home. Does that look like a woman being held against her will? Some of the riders were definitely looking uncomfortable now. One of them, a younger man with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Jack, you said we were rescuing someone. This doesn't look like a rescue." "Shut up, Danny." "He's right, though," another rider said. "This is looking more like harassment than justice." "I said shut up." Jack's face was going red. "You're all getting paid to do what I say, so do it." "Actually," Colt said calmly, "how much is he paying you?" No one answered. "Because I'm guessing it's not enough to risk your lives." "Not for this. Not for a man who's so desperate to feel powerful that he hired an army to threaten a pregnant woman." "We're not threatening," Danny started. "You're on my property with weapons drawn," Colt interrupted. "What would you call it?" The riders were exchanging glances now, doubt spreading like wildfire. Jack saw his control slipping and made a desperate grab for it. $50 to whoever brings me the woman," he said. $100 if you kill the man." The words hung in the air like poison. Mei Lin felt Colt tense beside her, felt him preparing to fight, to sell their lives as dearly as possible. But before anyone could move, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Everyone turned. Marshal Webb rode into the clearing from the northern trail, Deputy Morrison beside him. Behind them came 5 more men wearing badges, a full posse. "Marshal," Jack said, his voice suddenly oily. "Perfect timing. I was just about to— Oh! You were just about to get arrested for conspiracy to commit murder," Webb said. He looked at the hired guns. "Any of you men fire a shot, you'll hang alongside him. I suggest you think carefully about your next move." The hired guns needed no more convincing. Weapons lowered, hands went up, and the whole group began backing toward their horses. "You can't arrest me," Jack sputtered. "They're the ones—" "Save it." Webb dismounted, pulling handcuffs from his belt. "We've been following you since you crossed back into California. Heard you recruiting these men. Heard the prices you were offering. That's conspiracy, Jack. That's a hanging offense." "But she shot at me. She threatened me. On her own property after you showed up with 8 armed men to take her by force." Webb snapped the cuffs onto Jack's wrists. "We talked to Judge Harrison. We talked to people in town. Turns out you've been lying about pretty much everything." Jack's face went from red to pale. "You can't— I'm a citizen. So are they. And unlike you, they haven't broken any laws." Webb looked at Mei Lin and Colt. "You two all right?" "We are now," Mei Lin said. Her hands were shaking with adrenaline, but she kept her voice steady. "Good. Sorry it took us so long to catch up with him. He's been careful, staying just ahead of the law." Webb handed Jack off to Morrison. "Take him back to town. We'll hold him for trial." As the lawmen led Jack away, still protesting, still making threats, the hired guns dispersed quickly, clearly wanting no part of what came next. Within 10 minutes, the clearing was empty except for Mei Lin and Colt. They stood in silence, watching the dust settle. Then Mei Lin's legs gave out. Colt caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as the fear she'd been holding back crashed over her in waves. "I thought we were going to die," she said against his chest. "So did I. I thought our baby—" "I know." He held her tighter. "But we're okay. We're all okay." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, letting the reality sink in that they'd survived. That Jack was finally gone, finally facing justice for what he'd tried to do. That they were safe. Eventually, Colt pulled back enough to look at her face. "You were magnificent." "I was terrified." "You were both." He cupped her face in his hands. "You're the bravest person I've ever known." "I learned from you." "No, you were always brave. I just gave you reasons to show it." Mei Lin kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. Relief, love, gratitude, hope. When they pulled apart, both were crying. "Let's go inside," Colt said. "I think we've had enough excitement for one day." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the cabin, just being together, reassuring themselves that they were truly safe. Colt made tea while Mei Lin sat at the table, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move inside her. "Do you think it's really over?" she asked. "I think Jack will hang, and his friends won't come back without him." Colt set a cup in front of her. "And I think we can finally stop looking over our shoulders. That'll take some getting used to. We've got time." The baby kicked, strong enough that Mei Lin winced. "Someone's active today." Probably felt all that excitement. Colt reached over, rested his hand on her belly. Trying to protect their mother. Like father, like child. Let's hope not. I'd rather they have your courage than my recklessness. I'd rather they have both. Summer deepened, bringing long days and warm nights. Maylin's pregnancy progressed, her belly growing round and full, her movements becoming slower and more deliberate. Colt fussed over her constantly, which she found both endearing and exasperating. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she said one afternoon when he tried to carry water for her. "I know that. Then stop treating me like I might break." "Can't help it. You're carrying the most important thing in my life." "Two things. Me and the baby." "Same thing." She couldn't argue with that. In late August, 2 weeks before she was due, they made one final trip to town. Colt wanted her closer to the doctor when her time came, and despite her protests, Maylin knew he was right. Giving birth in a mountain cabin 8 miles from help was a risk they didn't need to take. They stayed at Mrs. Chen's boarding house. The widow had become something of a friend over the past year, one of the few people in town who'd treated Maylin with consistent kindness. "You look ready to pop," Mrs. Chen said cheerfully, helping Maylin settle into a room on the first floor. "I feel ready to pop. First babies are always late. You'll probably have another week." Mrs. Chen was wrong. Maylin's labor started that night, hard and fast, giving her barely enough time to wake Colt before the contractions were coming in waves that stole her breath. The next 12 hours were the hardest of her life. Pain like nothing she'd experienced, her body doing things she couldn't control, couldn't stop, could only endure. Colt stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping sweat from her face, whispering encouragement when she was sure she couldn't take another minute. The doctor came and went, checking her progress, offering bland reassurances that everything was normal. Normal felt like dying. But then, just as dawn was breaking, she felt the overwhelming urge to push. "That's it," the doctor said. "Next contraction, give me everything you've got." Maylin bore down, screaming through the effort, feeling like she was being torn apart. Again! She pushed again, and then suddenly there was a release, a moment of pure relief, and the sound of a baby crying. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squalling bundle covered in blood and vernix. Maylin fell back against the pillows, exhausted and exhilarated. A girl. The doctor cleaned the baby quickly, wrapped her in a blanket, and placed her in Maylin's arms. She was perfect, tiny and red-faced, and absolutely perfect. "Rose," Maylin whispered, looking down at her daughter. "Rose Li Hua Mercer." Colt was crying openly now, looking at his daughter with an expression of absolute wonder. "She's beautiful. She looks like an angry potato. The most beautiful angry potato I've ever seen." He touched one tiny hand, and Rose's fingers immediately curled around his. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." The baby stopped crying, seeming to recognize her father's voice. Her eyes, dark and unfocused, tried to find his face. "She knows you," Maylin said. "She better. I've been talking to her for months." They stayed in town for 2 weeks, giving Maylin time to recover and Rose time to get stronger before attempting the journey back to the cabin. Mrs. Chen was endlessly helpful, showing Maylin how to nurse, how to change diapers, how to function on almost no sleep. "It gets easier," she promised. "When? Give it 20 years. But despite the exhaustion, despite the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive, Maylin had never been happier. Rose was a good baby, fussy sometimes, but not excessively. She ate well, slept in reasonable stretches, and had already started making small sounds that weren't quite crying, but weren't quite cooing either. "She's trying to talk," Colt insisted. "She's 3 days old. Doesn't mean she doesn't have things to say." When they finally made the journey home, Rose slept through most of it, bundled against Maylin's chest in a sling Mrs. Chen had shown her how to make. The cabin looked the same as when they'd left, but somehow it felt different, more complete. This was where they'd raise their daughter, where she'd take her first steps, say her first words, grow from baby to child to woman. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling. Fall came with its usual glory, painting the valley in golds and reds. Maylin spent hours on the porch with Rose, showing her the mountains, the trees, the endless sky. "This is your home," she'd say. "These mountains, this valley, this life. It's all yours. Rose would blink up at her with those dark, serious eyes, and Mei Lin would feel her heart swell with love so intense it was almost painful. Winter arrived, their second winter together, but this time with a baby to keep warm and fed and entertained through the long, dark months. It was harder than the year before, but also richer. Every milestone Rose hit, her first smile, the first time she tracked movement with her eyes, the day she discovered her hands, felt like a miracle. She's growing too fast, Colt complained one evening, watching Rose kick her legs while lying on a blanket. That's what babies do. I want her to stay small forever. No, you don't. You want her to grow up strong and capable. Can't she do that slowly? Mei Lin laughed. Doesn't work that way. They survived the winter with less difficulty than they'd feared. Rose was healthy, and between the two of them, they managed to keep up with both baby care and all the work the cabin required. Spring brought news from town. Jack had been tried and convicted, sentenced to hang for conspiracy to commit murder. He'd gone to the gallows still proclaiming his innocence, still claiming Mei Lin and Colt were the real criminals. Nobody believed him. It's really over, Mei Lin said when Colt brought the news home. Yeah, it is. How do you feel? Relieved. Angry that it took so long. Grateful we survived it. He looked at Rose, now 6 months old and trying to grab her own toes. Mostly grateful. Me too. Summer came again, their third in the valley. Rose was crawling now, getting into everything, curious about the world in that fearless way babies had. They built a fence around the porch to keep her contained, but she still managed to find trouble. She's like you, Colt observed, fishing a pine cone out of Rose's mouth for the third time that day. How is that like me? Stubborn, determined to explore despite the risks. I don't eat pine cones. You would if they stood between you and something you wanted. Mei Lin couldn't really argue with that. One afternoon in late July, while Rose napped, Mei Lin and Colt sat on the porch watching the valley shimmer in the heat. Do you ever regret it? Colt asked. Choosing this life? Not once. Not even when things were hard? Especially not then. The hard parts made me who I am. She looked at him. Do you regret it? Are you joking? This has been the best 2 years of my life. Even with all the danger and drama? Even with that. Because at the end of it, I have you, and Rose, and a life that actually means something. He took her hand. I spent 16 years hiding from the world. You taught me how to live in it again. You taught me how to fight for what's mine. We taught each other. They sat in comfortable silence, hands joined, watching their valley breathe in the summer heat. I want more, Mei Lin said suddenly. Colt looked at her. More what? More children. More life. More of this. She gestured at the cabin, the mountains, the whole world they'd built together. I want to fill this place with family, with noise and chaos and love. How many more children are we talking about? I don't know, 3? 4? 4 children in a mountain cabin? We'll expand the cabin. Colt laughed, that full, genuine laugh she'd first heard over apple pie, and that still made her heart swell. All right, 4 children. We'll build an empire up here. The Mercer Empire has a nice ring to it. You're crazy, you know that? You married me anyway. Best decision I ever made. Years passed the way years do in the mountains, measured in seasons, in growth, in the slow accumulation of moments that became memories. Rose grew from baby to toddler to little girl, sharp and fearless and full of questions. A son came next, Thomas, quiet where his sister was loud, thoughtful where she was impulsive. Then twin girls, May and June, born in the spring and named for the months that bracketed their arrival. The cabin expanded to accommodate them all. More rooms, more space, more noise than Colt had ever imagined could exist in one place. But it was good noise. Happy noise. Mei Lin became known in the region, not as the Chinese woman who'd been scorned, but as the matriarch of a thriving mountain family. People came to her for advice on preserving food, on surviving hard winters, on raising children in isolation. She helped when she could, shared what she knew, and slowly built a reputation that had nothing to do with where she came from and everything to do with who she was. Colt remained mostly unchanged, still quiet, still uncomfortable in crowds, still happiest when it was just family. But he'd softened in ways that mattered, learning to show affection openly, to laugh easily, to be present in moments instead of always guarding against future pain. When Rose was 15, she asked about the early days. They were working in the garden together, the late summer sun warm on their backs, when she said, "Mama, tell me about when you first came here." Maylin paused in her weeding. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How you met Papa, why you stayed, what made you choose this life." So Maylin told her. Not everything, some things were private between her and Colt, but the essentials. The collapse in town square, the offer of work, the hard first winter and the men who'd come threatening violence, the choice to stand her ground instead of running. Rose listened with that intense focus she'd inherited from her father. "Were you scared?" she asked when Maylin finished. "Terrified. But you did it anyway. Because sometimes being scared is less important than being free." Rose thought about this. "Is that why you stayed? For freedom?" "I stayed because your father saw me when everyone else looked through me. Because he gave me space to be myself instead of trying to make me into something else. Because together we built something real." Maylin looked at her daughter. "And later I stayed because this became home. Because you and your siblings are here. Because everything I love is in this valley." "Do you think I'll stay?" Rose asked. "When I'm grown, I think you'll go where life takes you. And if that's here, wonderful. If it's somewhere else, that's wonderful too. Papa says the same thing. Your papa is wise. You're both wise and stubborn." Maylin laughed. "Can't argue with that." When Rose was 18, she left to attend school in San Francisco, the first of the Mercer children to venture into the wider world. She came back changed but not broken, educated but not softened, carrying her parents' lessons into a life that looked different from theirs, but was built on the same foundation of hard work and honest choices. Thomas stayed, taking over more of the physical labor as Colt aged. The twins split the difference. May became a teacher in Oro Grande. June married a farmer in the next valley over. By the time Maylin was 50, she had 12 grandchildren scattered across 3 states. And she and Colt were still in their cabin, still working the land, still choosing each other every single day. One evening, sitting on the porch that had been rebuilt twice and expanded 3 times, Maylin looked at her husband, gray-haired now, weathered by decades of mountain living, but still solid, still here. "Do you remember that first morning?" she asked, "when I came down from the loft and you were making eggs?" "Of course." "Did you know then?" "Know what?" "That it would be like this, that we'd build all of this." Colt was quiet for a moment. "No, I hoped, maybe. But I didn't know." He took her hand, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. "Did you?" "I knew I'd found something worth fighting for. Everything after that was just showing up. We're both good at showing up." "We are." They sat in the gathering darkness, hands joined, watching the valley settle into night. Somewhere in the cabin behind them, one of the grandchildren was crying. Someone else was laughing. Life continuing, generation after generation, all stemming from one desperate woman and one lonely man who'd chosen to see each other. "I'd do it all again," Maylin said. "Every hard moment, every scary choice. All of it. Even the pine cone incidents?" She laughed. "Even those?" "Me too." Colt squeezed her hand. "Every minute." They grew old together in those mountains, partners until the end. Maylin went first, in her sleep on a cold November night, with Colt holding her hand and their children gathered around. She was 73, and she'd lived more fully than most people managed in twice that time. Colt followed 6 months later, the cabin too quiet without her, the valley too empty. He was 78, and according to the doctor, his heart just gave out. But those who knew them said it was simpler than that. He'd spent 16 years alone before Maylin showed him how to live. Once she was gone, he didn't want to remember how. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the valley, under 2 simple headstones that read, Maylin Jow Mercer, 1855 to 1928. She chose courage. Colt Mercer, 1850 to 1929. He chose love. Their descendants still live in those mountains. The cabin has been expanded so many times it's barely recognizable, but the original structure is still there, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the valley, people swear they can hear laughter echoing off the peaks, the sound of two people who found each other against all odds and built something that lasted. Because that's the thing about courage and love. They don't care about odds. They don't care about prejudice or fear or all the reasons something shouldn't work. They just are. And when you find them together, when you hold on despite everything trying to pull you apart, you build something that outlasts any individual life. You build a legacy. Maylin had been wrong about one thing, though. On that dusty day in Oro Grande, when she fell and was caught by a stranger, she'd thought she was at the end of her story. She'd actually been at the beginning. And what a beginning it was.